On today's episode of the Grab Matters podcast, we sit down with a very special guest, pro wake skater Matt Manzari. We talk with Matt about his start into water sports and wakeboarding and then wake skating, what it's like to ride for a company like Nike. We also talk who has the best kickflip in wake skating. We're also talking never been done before tricks, video parts. We also talk about Matt's two kind of life-changing injuries. One he had while wake skating, and then another one where he was electrocuted, and how that's kind of changed his life and his outlook on life as well. I do want to go ahead and thank all the Patreon subscribers. Without your guys' support, this podcast wouldn't be possible, so thank you a ton for subscribing to that Patreon. If you are interested in supporting the podcast, joining the Patreon is the best way to do that. All Patreon members get a sticker pack shipped out to them no matter where you're at in the world once you join. So that support means a ton. Thank you guys a ton. Thanks everyone for liking, commenting, sharing. That does mean a ton to me to even just share the podcast on your story or with friends and stuff. That helps a ton. So thanks everyone for tuning in. Without further ado, enjoy this episode with Matt Manzari.
I approve waterboarding. They're talking about wakeboarding. The thing about wakeboarding, every trick is an invert.
Backside.
Air railings.
A new dimension.
All right, we're back. Another episode of the Grab Matters podcast. Today we welcome on a very special guest, Matt Manzari. How's it going?
It's going great. Super excited to be here, Hunter. Let's get into wake.
Super
wake
stoked to
history.
have you, dude. we got a lot to cover today, no doubt about that. Matt's loaded up with 2 coffees, sparkling water, and he's ready to go. Ready to go.
I'm ready to go. I usually don't even do 2 coffees. I usually go a regular and then decafs all day. So
This is
it's a
2
special
fully
day.
loaded.
2 fully loaded. And really, I blame Dan Jarrett for that because I'm not a morning person, and I don't think you are either. You
Not
were like
particularly, no.
Yeah, you were not super wanting to go early, but Dan's in town, and I really want to hang out with him. So this would have happened at like 1 p.m., but we're doing it early.
Yeah, we're knocking this one out. I think this was 8 a.m. when you got here, so yeah, we're bright and early. But hey, good way to get the day started here. A couple coffees and a podcast. First couple questions. Wake pants, yes or no?
Wake pants, yes or no?
Mm-hmm.
There's such a tear there. Most people are going to be decisive on that one, but I look at my life in phases. And there was a time where I was a kid and I saw Shane Bonifay in wake pants, and I was like, that's so sick. I want baggy pants that I can wakeboard in too. And then later on, it kind of like became uncool. It's all about cut off jean shorts, and that was our whole life. But then there was a good, like Randall Harris, when he lived at my house, like I just want to ride in jackets and pants and all sorts of stuff. So currently today, I probably would say no.
No, I like it. No, nobody's really said no. Everyone's like, oh yeah, they're all right. Like nobody will take a decisive stance.
No, I'll
I
say
like
no.
that.
Yeah.
I like that. Let's go favorite grab.
Favorite grab.
Yep. So I was thinking on a wake
Stalefish.
skate. On a wake skate?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have one on a wakeboard to watch?
Method. Yeah. A
Classic.
good method you can't beat. I mean,
Yeah.
but that's like the cliche answer probably.
It is the cliche answer. Everyone's always like, oh, I'm going to go method. It's like, well, yeah, that's to be expected.
Yeah, I like Stalefish because there's a lot you could do with it. Like I like you can to almost shift it so it looks like you're going 180 fully and then come back, or almost like do a Stalefish and then like land cross roped and actually bring it to 180.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah. I haven't thought about doing that on a skate in a while, but that's that's a good one. A little shifty with the Stalefish. I like that. So I talked to your wife, Bobby, right? So okay.
That might be scary or not.
She wants to know about the lost Scott Byerly tapes.
Wow.
So I know nothing about
That's
this.
one. So that's one. That's something I've probably talked about with like 5 people.
Love it.
So that's one that hasn't been talked about. So years ago, Scott had this video series called Volume, and he'd do these volume wake skate videos, and each video is like montage of tricks and then a pro spotlight. And I don't remember what volume I got, but I got a pro spotlight and worked really, really hard for that section. And I mean, Scott's the best. I don't want to like talk about Scott. He's like the man, the myth, the legend, but he might have misplaced a camera bag
Happens.
with a lot of footage, like months of footage in it. And we were the night before the premiere, and I went over to the editor's house, Brandon Parker, to look at my pro spotlight. And I had this vision for that part where I'm like, hey, I want to do like the first minute of the part is one single line. And I like had shot for like a month to get this like crazy line. It had like double flip, tray flip, toe side tray flip, backside flip, toe side, backside flip. It was like back and forth. And I was so excited. And he like was like, here it is. And he played it. And I laughed and I was like, oh, that's funny. Like I thought he was fully pranking me. And I was like, oh, I really want to see the part though. And he's like, that's the part. I'm like, what do you mean that's the part? And I like was like, remember this that we shot? Remember this? Remember this? And he's like, oh yeah. Oh yeah. And he calls Scott, and Scott's like, dude, I lost this camera bag and there was a few tapes in there, but I thought we had enough other stuff. Sorry, dude. And it was all like my whole pro spotlight was like, not old footage, but like some stuff from like previous, just montages from previous ones. And like he put some wake to wake stuff in there that was like while the ballast was filling, and I was like just screwing around. And I was like, dude, like what can we change? And we kind of we took a couple things out, but it was like, I was like, didn't even want that to release. But I mean, people told me they were stoked on the spotlight, but you know how it is, like with your riding, you're gonna be critical.
Oh yeah.
So for years I was just like, gosh, if there's one thing I could do again, it would be to go back and tell Scott to really watch that camera bag or take those tapes out once we got the footage.
No kidding.
Because there's a really good session. Like there's some really good sessions out there that somebody has that probably doesn't even know what wake skating is, and they thought they just stole the camera.
They don't know they're sitting on a pot of gold of some wake skate footage. Probably one of the best lines ever put down.
It was would have been my best section that turned into my maybe least favorite section.
Well, thanks to the wife for that one, for bringing that one up.
That's a good one. I haven't thought about that in 10 years.
There you go. Wow, she really pulled that one out.
Yeah.
Impressive. Okay, so I say we kind of dive into the early days of Matt Manzari. So there's a lot I think that we got to cover here, but let's just kind of start off how you got into water sports as a whole.
I was born in upstate New York. My parents had, they got this little like summer cottage. It's like a 1-1, turned into like a 2-1 little, it was an old boys camp that had like a community beach. So they like sold the little camp houses, and we got like a little spot to get water access. And my parents got like an old boat, and we started watching wakeboard videos and saw like these guys building. So we went to my dad's shop and built like our own first 10-foot pole, they called them, and we just used ratchet straps around the nose of the boat. And, I started kneeboarding first, of course, because I had to be super cool when I was like 4. And then my first email address was kneeboard901@AOL.com.
Really? Committed.
Yeah. And then I got into wakeboarding and just loved it. I mean, it was so much fun because it was like snowboarding in the summertime, and I skateboarded all year round in my parents' basement in the winter and all through the summer. So the first time I saw wake skating, I don't remember how old I was. It must have been like 11 or 12. And I got this Hyperlight Scape. It was like a flat deck with foam on it. And I just went to OWC, and I remember just riding off the little tiny kicker and was like, that's so cool. It's like skateboarding. And I kind of just never looked back.
That was the kick right there. So when did you move down to Florida, though? Because you said you were in New York growing up.
So we moved pretty young. I was like 10 or 11 when we moved down. So I consider myself a, Florida boy now. I'm like, once you've lived there more than half your life, you're local. Yeah,
I feel like once the years, outstack the years you spend anywhere else, like that's kind of new local, right? So did you move on a lake when you moved down here? You mentioned you went to OW.
No, we lived in Tavares in a neighborhood house, and we'd go. They had this kids club at OWC that like Thursday mornings. It was super cheap to ride, so we'd go there like every Thursday because we were homeschooled, and then we had a boat we would take out to Lake Weir in Ocala and ride. And then we moved on to a lake when I was like 14.
Okay. So a few years after you came down here.
Yeah.
You remember what boat that was?
Yeah. So we had a Malibu Sunsetter that we had added ballast to in a tower. So basically made a Sunsetter into a Wakesetter. And then we got our Wakesetter in like 04, 05 maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, that was funny. I was so sold out Malibu guy back then. Like I remember calling Lonnie Farmer, the Malibu rep or Malibu team manager when I started, after I turned pro. I'm fast forwarding a little bit, and I was like, I either will not have a boat sponsor or I'll ride for Malibu. Like I was like totally sold out. Like you guys have the best wake in the world, and that's how I got in Malibu because she was like, who is this kid? She's like, we've already done our budget for the year, but I'll give you photo incentive. And I was like, perfect.
Deal.
I'll try to prove myself this year.
I'm down for the cause. So I guess kind of walk through those early days, probably when you moved down to Florida, you discover wake skating. What's the progression for you? Because you said you're going to OW every Thursday morning when it's kind of a cheap kids club thing and probably riding behind the boat a little bit, maybe when your family takes the boat out.
And back then I was still wakeboarding more. Like I was wake skating was just like fun thing I did. And it was weird. It's almost like I didn't look at that as an option because it was such early days for wake skating. Like I was trying to be a wakeboarder. And then it was really like when Reed and I started hanging out because I went to wakeboard camp, to his parents' camp, and we were both homeschooled, lived about 40 minutes apart. So after camp, we started hanging out a bunch and, we kind of we'd like go do our wakeboard contest run for like the gravel tour and like train, I guess. But part of that, like his parents really wanted him to have his run because he was on track to be like, try to be a pro wakeboarder.
Yeah.
And we like go wakeboard together and then we'd be like, cool, we wakeboarded. Let's go wake skate. It was almost like, cool, we got
like, check the box.
Yeah, we like did our job. Now we could go like have fun. And then eventually it was, I don't know, I was probably like 14. I was like, wait, why are we wakeboarding? I don't have to do this.
Yeah.
and just started wake skating a lot more.
Okay. So 14, 15-ish, because when did you sign with Nike? That was 15, 16?
Yeah, 15, 16. I think I was almost 16.
So the progression kind of happened pretty quickly of start taking wake skating seriously and then wake skating.
Well, and I never had this vision of being pro. Like if we're getting into like how that progression happened.
Yeah.
You know, I've told this story a bunch of times, but it really was, I was 14, almost 15. And my dad told me the story of Roger. And he's like, hey, did you know that for, as long as we've been using a mile as a unit of measurement, we've been measuring how long it takes people to run it. And it was like a known fact by runners and coaches and experts that a 4-minute mile wasn't possible for the human body. Then in May of 1954, Roger Bannister runs that 4-minute mile. Within 6 years, we got over 30 runners doing it. I mean, today we've had high schoolers do it. Hundreds of people have done it. And I remember thinking like, I don't think leg technology has changed much. Like I don't do endurance sports. Let's be clear. I do sports where you stand there and you're like, oh, let's do a trick. And then you stand there. But if you ask me like, what's the most raw physical thing? I'd be like, I don't know, run that way. I'll time you. And realizing like even that had this bigger mental component that like changed everything for me. Because I went from just a kid that loved to wake skate and wakeboard, never thinking there was anything more than just, I want to do this every day because I love it, to being like, oh, I think I could be someone in this industry, but not in a sense of like, oh, I want to be famous, but like, I think I could help shape wake skating. And started being like, I wonder if an underflip is possible. Like, I wonder if all these tricks are possible. And it wasn't a matter of like skill, but a mental approach to it. So I started going out and not being like I think I can, I know I can mindset. Cause I'm like, even that has doubt. You're like, I need to believe myself. No, but I went out and was like, I need to expect to land this trick as much as I'd expect to land a shove it. When in reality, it's a trick I've never done and nobody else has. And so I started, just really focusing on trying all these NBDs and new tricks and pushing myself. And before I knew it, I did have a handful of tricks that were mine. And then that was when I started talking to Nike, and my whole life changed. It was like it was like almost like a 1 year transition. It was like I went from like, oh yeah, like I landed a kickflip to like, man, I have this huge pile of tricks. And now, and it was really, I was out with Trevor Hansen, was like kind of my break. Then I wasn't looking for that. It was like during like a nationals or maybe a pro tour stop, and everyone was out of town because like he was just like my friend's brother. Me and Trevor didn't ride together very much, but Trevor called and he's like, I need a boat driver. I have a photo shoot with Josh Letchworth. And I was like, okay. And I like came and drove for him. And then he was doing chase on the jet ski. So afterwards, he's like, you want to take a set quick? Josh could take some photos. I was like, sure. And I did like a 3 flip and a backside flip. And Josh was like, hey, like, I've never seen a 3 flip in person. And he's like, isn't there like only a few people I could do that? And I was like, yeah, I think like me, Reed, Nick Taylor, there's like 3 or 4 of us now. And he's like, can I do like an article can I call Wakeboard Mag? You want to do something together? I'm like, yeah. He did this like coming up article. And then within like 2 or 3 months, I had like a board sponsor, a boat sponsor, signed with Nike, had like travel reimbursement. And it just was like, suddenly you're going around the world, like doing this thing you love. And you're like, well, this is awesome. But it really wasn't the goal. The goal was just to be like, hey, I want to land a bunch of tricks. And I think it's possible if I change my mental approach.
That's interesting. I didn't know that happened. I mean, that's such a young age to have a mental approach that I would say that's a very mature mental approach to have at such a young age. I think of myself as a 15, 16-year-old. I was like, all right, can I do back roll? Can I grab it indie? Like, let's maybe see if I can do that. Not like, okay, I'm going to try 3 flip on wake skate. But
I also say that to say, one of the things I think is cool is I do think a lot of people view athletes as they kind of have this like natural gift or they don't. And like, I always try to tell kids like, no, you can do it. That whole like cliche, like you can do anything you put your mind to. I really believe that. I don't think I'm a special person. I don't think I'm like a set apart rider. I think that I just changed my mindset and it changed my life. And I think anyone can do that. I think you can go and focus really hard and think differently than the social norms in your life will and can change.
Yeah, I totally agree with that as well. So you're talking some tricks. I mean, what was your like bag of tricks at that kind of turning point of your career? Because it sounds like you were landing quite a bit of stuff, in somewhat rapid succession there.
I mean, yeah, wake skating was progressing pretty quick, and it was like a lot of it too was Reed and I being homeschooled and riding together and not really riding with other people. So it's like that's where a lot of consistency came from. And I'd say like regular tricks were like, kick flip, frontside flip, backside flip, 3 flip, backside big flip. Eventually, got into, started trying varial flip, underflip to try to do that first underflip. Stuff like I remember, I think Andrew Pastura landed, this is later on now, but he landed like a great flip. And I was like, okay, I think it's possible in the flats and like some stuff like that. But I was always like fascinated on the tech side, doing flip tricks off rails, like trying to kick flip off flat bars or varial flip off flat bars, trying to do heel flip off flat bar or off an incline. It was like, because I couldn't heel flip, but I was like, I bet I could do it off a rail, and then redid a heel flip. And I was like, oh, and you could do it in the water. But yeah, stuff like that.
Quite a few flip tricks for sure. I mean, that's kind of probably the time when flip tricks were really getting big, it would seem like. So first sponsor, you picked up Nike and a couple others, but what was the first one? Do you remember the first one you kind of had?
First sponsor ever was Performance Ski and Surf.
Shout out Bill.
Shout out to Bill. He's my longest friend, sponsor, like industry person. I feel like I was, I think I was like 14 still. I think it was right before I turned 15. We went into performance for something, and I like went up to the counter, and Bill like walked around away from the register and just gave me a hug and said, what do you say we put it on the team account? And I was like, really? And that was like really cool to get on performance. And then cassette was right after that. Cassette wake skates. And that was like kind of a funny story because when we were talking about consistency, like I thought that was the most important thing. And I wish I still had it, like the first sponsor me tape, But I was like, I should show him like because I'd ridden with a bunch of riders that like might be able to land a trick in a set, but couldn't do them in a row. So I did 10 kickflips in a row, and the editor put like 1, 2, and it was like letters coming up. And I was like, gosh, this is so boring. But looking back and cheesy, but I sent that to Thomas Harrell, and he's like, oh, dude, that's super cool. And I started talking to him, and then my only injury happened through my whole career up until the end when I had my wake thing, but I put my arm through the rope and kind of peeled the muscle off a little bit, like right. So I like sent that to Thomas. He's like, I want to ride together. I think there's something here. And I like spent the next few months with my arm in a sling. During that, while my arm was in the sling, Reed's parents did that contest he talked about on like David, and Aaron Reed was there and the cassette team. And then Reed like won, and they're like put him on cassette. And it was kind of cool because then when I got my arm out, I went back to Thomas. And it was kind of sweet because we both ended up on cassette as the last 2 riders, but we got there different ways, which I like because I look back and I'm like, if I would have got on cassette right before I put my arm through and then been like, you got to see my buddy Reed, then it would have been this like, you know, I kind of helped him. Or if he would have got on and then would been like, hey, check out my buddy Matt. But I had like sent Thomas my tape, got hurt. He went to the contest, got on, and we both like ended up in the same destination.
Basically.
Yeah. And I don't know why that mattered at that time, but it seemed cool to like feel like we both earned our spot and didn't.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that does matter. You kind of want to, not in the sense like you're helping someone get there, you're doing it for them, but if you do it completely on your own, in a sense, it's a little bit more fulfilling, I would imagine. But so yeah, cassette. What else kind of is coming in at that point as well? You mentioned performance, but
so then maybe it was Nike. There was an audio company back then. I don't think they're still around, called Tantrum Audio, and I think their logo was a guy doing a tantrum.
Classic.
So like when I ordered my new Malibu, when I was on Malibu, I ordered it with no speakers, and then Tantrum did all the audio for me.
Look it up.
And then Arnett sunglasses came in. And then I did my Nike contract with shoes, and then 6 months later signed with them for clothes. So I was head to toe with Nike.
Interesting.
Well, not head to toe because I had a sunglass sponsor, but that was like my main sponsors. And then eventually like Sea-Doo. And then if you're going down like through my career, so about a year after cassette is when I got on Gator boards.
Yep.
And that was kind of funny because the Gator boards team manager came up to me at Surf Expo and was like, dude, we'd love, we're looking, to design a new wake skate, and we'd love to have you come work on the Deuce Pop because we've got this like bi-level and we know you're a bi-level guy. I was like, no, dude, like, even though they don't pay us, like cassette is the core wake skate company. I'm like, so it's almost like you don't want to be bought. You're like, even if it's a few $100 a month, like it's not worth it. Like I'm not going to ride for Gator boards. And my favorite wakeboarder of all time was Randall Harris. And at that time, I don't know if you remember this point, but Randall had left the industry and disappeared. He disappeared for like a few years where people, even his friends in the industry, couldn't contact him, didn't know what happened. He just like dropped off. Well, I look over at the Gatorboards booth. I'm like, oh, Randall's over there. And I was like, is that Randall Harris? And he's like, yeah, because we were pretty far from the booth. And I'm like, what happened? He's been gone for years. He's my favorite rider. And he's like, yeah, this is his like welcome back. Like he's walking back into wake, like out of disappearing. And I was like, okay, I'll sign. And like worst negotiation ever. Like, I don't even know what you're offering me, but cool, I'll sign. And I kind of knew like, I love Randall's riding, but we had pretty different lifestyles. Like I knew he kind of came from that like kind of gnarly party lifestyle. And I was like still a young kid. I'm like 16, just turned 16, whatever. And I didn't realize like he had just gotten sober. So like I go on my first Gatorboards trip, and I'm expecting to like walk into like everybody just doing everything, like the gnarly Gatorboards parties I'd hear about. And those guys are all sitting around the table, like doing a Bible study, eating ice cream. And I was like, what's up, guys? Like, what's going on here?
Where's the 40 ounces and the spliffs? I mean,
yeah. And then Randall moved in for that summer, and we filmed Transgression, and just became super close. But that was super cool. But that's how I ended up on Gator boards. And then eventually Gator went under and ended up with CWB, now Connolly.
So we do have to back up to Nike.
Okay.
What was Nike looking like? Because you said you had some photo incentives with, you're kind of heavy on that side. Nike's a big company, right? So like,
yeah, it's funny. I remember my team manager saying, like in any industry, it's hard to come off a Nike contract, and they kind of try to do that. It's kind of like Red Bull. Like they definitely pay pretty well. I mean, I was a young kid. I couldn't even drive yet when I got sponsored by them, and they were offering me like almost $2,000 a month plus really good incentives, plus a travel budget. They called it a development fund at that time. So they're like, your development fund is anything that has to do with wake skating. So like it was like 12 or 15,000 a year, which was pretty good. And they're like, so any flights you want to reimburse, if you're going to fly to shoot, you want to build a rail, you want to build a pool gap, you want to get a gym membership, anything that's going to help you as an athlete. Not to mention the ridiculous amounts of product they'd send you. I was always like, dude, if Nike goes under, like I won't feel bad, because I do a sport most people don't know what it is. And I am pretty simple. Like I wore white and black shoes. That's it. Just black with a white stripe. And I'd be like, hey, I want, when Bradas came out, I want white and black Bradas. And they'd be like, cool. And they'd send me like 6 pairs. And then the next month I'd get like purple high tops and yellow this and all this stuff. And I'm like, hey, I just
give me the black and white, baby.
And they'd be like, oh yeah, but we're still going to send you every 6L model that comes out. So like, I mean, this went all the way through to where when I was in college, I had in our boys' dorm, I had on the bulletin board Nike stuff for sale. Shoe size 10.5, 50% off, and clothes, shirt size medium and large or whatever. And that was running all the time. I probably sold like, I don't know, 10 pairs of shoes a week for years. And I still, there's one point my wife and I, like when we were in college, she's like, we have to get rid of some shoes, because one whole room in our apartment was like probably waist high. Every wall was shoe boxes unopened. And then I had shelves up on top with all the ones I had opened. And she's like, I just counted, there's over 200 pairs of shoes in there. She's like, if you wore a different pair every day, you couldn't wear them twice in a year. And I was like, and I have given away hundreds of pairs. Like I just saw a guy the other day that I didn't even know I ever gave a pair of shoes to. And he's like, dude, I still have 6 O's from you. I'm like, you do? He's like, yeah, you gave me like 5 pairs. I'm like, I did. Yeah, so I can't imagine what those other contracts are like for like football and basketball.
Oh, yeah.
It's got to be insane.
So they're hooking up with the shoes. I imagined you guys were getting a lot of shoes, but it sounds like an insane amount of shoes.
Yeah, insane. And because they just wanted to send all their products, because that was the whole idea behind 6.0, was to be like colorful and fun. And, because like, I don't know how much you know about the Nike story. Like if you want me to share that.
Oh yeah.
So like,
yeah.
And I don't know if we're gonna get in trouble if there's like insider Nike info, but like I think 6.0 is a plan to build it and then cut it like from the beginning, because it ran for 10 years exactly. So back in the 90s, Nike came out with a skate shoe, basically got laughed out of the skateboard industry. They came out with one shoe, they put a picture in the mag, they were going to sponsor some big guys, and Thrasher magazine wrote an article about how much they suck and they're a jock company and don't belong in skateboarding. And they were like, whoa, we're not used to this. We're used to just being like,
come in, take over, we're good.
Yeah. So they pulled out, let the dust settle for like close to 10 years. Then they went to Tampa and picked up some up and coming skaters, and they're like, all right, we're going to make this brand Nike SB. And we're not going to can't be in a skate shop with over 2 locations. So SB couldn't be in Zoomies, couldn't be in Pakistan. It was only like your local mom and pop skate shop. We're not going to come out with a team video for 10 years. Their only big pro is Paul Rodriguez, who kind of gave them this insight of like, you have to understand skateboarders. And
you got to start from the core and work out.
Yeah. So you got to have a core team. And it's amazing because I have this theory I always call like truth versus belief, and like not in an ethical standpoint, but the truth doesn't matter. It's what people believe. And like the truth is they were the same jock company that got laughed out of the industry years prior, but now they came in as the little guy who cares. And it's like, dude, at my local vert skate shop in Tavares, those kids only skated like vert blanks, like all local, like screw corporate America, but it was wall-to-wall SB, and every kid at the skate park was an SB. So it worked. Like they came in as the little guy that cares.
It's like perception is reality.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing.
And they did that. So then when they wanted to get into other action sports, they're like, well, we can't compromise. Like skateboarding is so delicate. And like, I remember them telling me this on the 6-0 story. And they're like, so we want to be in PacSun. We want to be in Zoomies. We want to sponsor mountain biking and snow skiing and wake skating and surfing, but skateboarders will think we sold out. So we'll create this fun brand, colorful shoes, really bright in your face. We'll put it in all the chain stores and do all the action sports. And then it was like convenient. It ran for 10 years, like almost exactly. And then they discontinued 6-0, and all those athletes that were left just ended up getting SB contracts, or they kind of stepped a little bit out of action sports. But it was like once they'd like made their name, they're like, hey guys, it's all the same. And then they just like pulled the plug. And a lot of people were always like, oh, what was 6-0? Was it 6 different sports? Like, no, Phil Knight, like if you read Shoe Dog, they talk about that, but like he originally went in, to get the loan for Nike, and he was talking to the bank, and he wanted to call it, I don't want to mess it up. It was like Mission 6 or something.
Okay, something like that.
And then his partner was like, no, that's stupid. Like we need like legit name. And like, what if we did like Nike? Like it's like this Greek mythology name. It sounds cool. And he's like, no, I want to do Mission 6. And then he was in the bank interview, and the guy was like, what's the name? And he was like super nervous. And he's like, Nike. And he just like went with his buddy's idea because his buddy had like planned in his head that his name was so stupid. So 6.0 was just a tribute to Phil Knight's original vision for Nike.
I didn't know that.
That's where the 6 comes from.
So I think there is actually a lot to unpack there. I think that's really fascinating. I wasn't fully, I didn't know that story entirely, but I've heard of, Nike coming in skateboarding early, getting laughed out. They did a similar thing in snowboarding where they, inserted themselves, it's an interesting way to put it, but into the snowboard market. And then they pulled out. And when they came in at first, snowboarders had a little bit of backlash. It's not quite like skating where the culture is so strong and diehard and core. But there was definitely public backlash about like, hey, they're just coming in, they want to make some money, and then they're going to leave. Yeah. And people, either believed it or didn't. And then eventually the same thing did happen. They came in, they signed athletes, and then they left. And so I think that's fascinating it's just interesting to unpack about how it, was involved in 6.0 as well.
Yeah. And that was like, because I remember that in snowboarding because they got Danny Cass and some of these big riders.
Yeah, Sage Gotzenberg.
It was a few years, and then they were gone. And they had the Snow Force ones. I had a pair of those. They were actually pretty cool boots.
People did love the boots. I will say that.
I liked them. But yeah, it's funny. Everything's so predicted with Nike. Like it's so planned. Nothing happens on accident. I remember because just working with other smaller brands and seeing the difference between them. I mean, they're working 2 years in advance or more. So I remember sitting in a meeting. It was like me, Nick Taylor was there. I think Ben might've been there. And then, so that we would do this cool trip every year called Migration. And they would take like 3 athletes from each sport. So you'd have like a couple skateboarders, a couple bikers, and it's kind of cool because you realize action sports is all the same mentality, different vehicle. But they would put us through meetings, and we do a lot of fun stuff. Like every day would make a fun activity and then design meetings and stuff. And I do like that about them. They really listen to the athletes. And I remember them being like, hey, what do you guys think would be a cool trend to bring in? And they were like, we want to come up with like a really cool fall thing. And we were working on like fall 08 or fall 09 or something like that. And it was like 07 or 06. And they're like, we're thinking like flannels. And we're like lumberjack flannels. And they're like, yeah, like make them super cool. Do a bunch of like earth tones and cool colors, and we'll make it like a thing. And I remember we designed like a ton of cool flannels for 6.0. And then like a year later, they came out, and like within 5 months, like Fox had flannels, and all of PacSun, all of Zoomies, everything was like flannels and jeans were in. And Huge. I was like, dude, I remember being like, hey, we're going to make this a thing. And then it was.
That's wild, leading the trend like that, like bringing it in.
Yeah, and then even like the shoe design stuff's cool. They have like they'll hook you up to like a million little like, it looks like you're in like a spandex suit with
like the video game type
sensors,
thing?
Yeah, and they use like light and heat sensors all over your body, and they'll like give you a skateboard and say like do 100 ollies, and then they'll watch like where your wear points are on your shoes, where you're sweating more, and like, okay, we'll put dry fit in these areas on shirts, and these like, they're pretty technical for
they do it legit
for what they do.
Yeah.
And And I love like the original. The other question I get a lot is, what was the mutant? If you remember, the original 6 logo was a 2-headed mutant, and that was supposed to be for action sports. They're like, you know, a regular person sees a spillway, but you see a spillway and what you can do down it. You know, a skateboarder sees a bench, you can sit on that, but you can also you can grind it and do all these things on it. So it was like action sports see everything as 2 possibilities, like the intended use and then what that can fit into your sport, and kind of these 2 minds.
I didn't know that either. I knew that I saw the mutant, but I never heard the story behind it. That is fascinating, because I feel like I speak for, I feel like a lot of action sports athletes, when you see, whether it's snowboarding, skateboarding, wake skating, wakeboarding, it's like you see a handrail or whatever.
Yeah.
You see 2 things. Like
you do.
Your brain literally always goes to, what can I do this, you know, with the trick or whatever.
Yeah.
So.
The one regret I have from Nike is not saving all my shoes, because who knew that like vintage shoes, and now we consider vintage as like 05 to 2010. Dude, somebody told me the other day, like 6.0s are worth something. I'm like, no. And they showed me the most expensive one right now. It's this shoe that's on this site for $4,000. And I'm like, I have a pair in my attic. He's like, no, you don't. And I'm like, yeah, look. And I went and got it, but I only have like 5 pairs of shoes left.
I was going to say, how many you got left?
But I threw out probably 20 like a year ago, because it's funny. Like, there's a verse I love. It's like, don't store up treasure on earth that collects dust and cobwebs, like store up treasure in heaven. And I always joke about shoes and that, because I saved shoes for years. And then like I went to go wake skate, and I pulled a fresh pair of 6.0s out like a year ago. And first trick, I was like, oh, what just happened? It feels all weird and floppy. And the bottom fell off one and was flapping on the other one. And all the glue just over years, like they look perfect and pristine, that you pick it up and they like fall apart.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how are these guys like saying there's a thing? But I'm like, man, if I go back, I would have just got a storage unit, climate controlled, and just kept all those shoes. I'd have like 1,000 pair of shoes.
I was going to say, yeah.
Go to these shoe meets and then just retire off my shoes.
And the people who collect them, they're not wearing them anyways, right? Most people, they're just,
know.
I would imagine, if you're paying that much for a shoe. If I'm paying $4,000 for a shoe, I mean, I'm going to wear it, but like most people are probably just, you know, wall hanger or whatever.
Like I said, I'm not a shoe guy. I still wear just white and black Nikes, and I wear Nijas just because they have that rubber toe grip and they seem to last the longest. So I just try to get, now I'm always like shopping the deals. You go to Zoomies and wait for that like 50% off sale and buy 3 pairs of Nijas, and I'm like, cool, I'm good for a year.
So I was going to ask, when you wake skate, do you still wear Nikes? Mm-hmm. You do?
I do. I tried to go to Vans for a bit, because everyone, like all my friends skateboard, say there's more board feel, and there is, but maybe it's just as I'm older, like there's almost too much board feel for me. Like skateboarding, like if I land primo or something, it's like I'm limping around for a while, and I'm like, I almost want a little more padding.
Yeah, feel that.
A little bit of arch support.
So before we jump off Nike here, this is me not knowing wake skating that well, but I know Reef had wake skate shoes, right, that were made to be in the water. Did Nike ever dive into any of that, or were you guys just
we made a shoe with closed cell foam that drained quick and didn't hold weight, but I only use that to shoot. Like we use that to shoot it, like get a magazine shot for that shoe or whatever, but I don't think I ever rode that shoe more than a month. Like, I mean, it was cool and it worked fine, but it had too much padding for me. I like the Brada. The Brada is like kind of like the Vans slip-on. And when you can get shoes free, like now I can't skate those shoes because I'll blow through a shoe in probably 2 sets or 3 sets, and then your toe's bleeding because you just wear through that little spot in your toe. That's why, like Nigel, the rubber toe grip takes forever to wear through. But back in the day, you could just go through shoes quick. But yeah, I like the thinner, more board feel. And if you don't have any foam in there anyways, they don't hold water. So, yeah.
Makes sense. So I think before we move on, I think it's a good time to dive into the LF'N wheel of questions presented by Liquid Force.
The LF'N wheel of questions.
Okay, let's go.
So if you want to go ahead and grab that, if you can reach it, I don't know if you can or if it's too far or not. Oh, you're going to spin it up there? This is the first time.
First time?
Do it. Yes.
You want me to grab it or you want me to spin it?
No, spin it up there. Let's see what happens. Oh, look at that. We might be able to leave that up there from now on.
Oh, best kickflip.
So, yeah, this is question to you. Who has the best kickflip? in wake skating? It could be now. It could have been back then. It could be both. Take it wherever you want it.
Ben Horan. For sure. I love Ben's kickflip. The way he sets up, there's so much style in his setup, and then it's just super flicked right off the nose, catches it. And it's all his skateboard background, but like when I started riding with Ben a lot, like I feel like my kickflip changed a little bit because I always was like, hey, flicking is important. But watching Ben do his kickflips, I was like, I think the first time we rode a drop together, I saw him do a kickflip and I saw it fully rotate and he caught it with his back foot above the lip of the drop. Whereas most wake skaters at that point were jumping down and it was kickflipping as they were going
Falling
down.
into it.
And I was like, I need to make sure my kickflip finishes before I get lower than the top pool always now.
Yeah.
And that was when I really like went down that rabbit hole of like, I really want to care about my kickflip.
Yeah. I'll put a clip in of Ben doing a kickflip. I was going to do best ollie too, but I feel like best kickflip for me, I like.
Well, best ollie is Daniel Grant, without a doubt.
Yeah?
Without a doubt.
He can get up there.
I will argue that to anyone in the world because the kid's a freak. Like, it's funny. Daniel Grant is like probably the most unrecognized wake skater. And it's almost like there's going to be haters when you're really good.
Yeah.
But everyone's like, oh, well, that's Daniel. He can just do Daniel stuff. And it's like, yeah, but Daniel can do...
Wait a minute.
Daniel can do Daniel stuff because he freaking wake skates like 80 hours a day. And he just rides every cable. And he he understands the metrics of the board so well and how to create lift using the cable for sure too. But like we were at Battle Falls and I remember he's like, I'm going to ollie up. And Reed and I are like, no, that's a really bad idea. Like you're going to die. Like the top concrete step is like up to your neck. He's like, I could do it. And we're like, it's not worth it. Like it's not even going to be worth it. And he's like, just pull me. And he went and ollied up Battle Falls. And we're all just like,
First try?
yeah, first try. And we're like, how did that just happen? Like nobody can do that. Yeah, he's amazing. He's an amazing rider. And it always blew my mind that he never got a rider of the year. Like not to go on a Daniel Grant tangent,
No.
but Reed and I talked about that for years because we're like, they would always present it at Wake Awards. Like this rider has done the most in competing, in video parts, in back in the day magazines, whatever. But Daniel would go around to all these different cables. So he would stoke people out, like do a lot of traveling, get a lot of content on video. He would win everything he entered. And he really did like media contests and growing the sport did. And I mean, probably more than anybody else a couple of years and never really got recognized for it. I felt like
In both disciplines.
yeah,
You did wakeboarding and
wakeboarding.
Yeah.
Dude, when I went to Wake the Line, that was so gnarly. Like I think that was the first pro contest he won both divisions. But they flew me out there after my accident. I was still wrapped up like a mummy. I couldn't ride, but just to announce and judge and just be a part of it. And I go out and Daniel had just won wake skate and now they're going to do wakeboard finals. And he's doing his interview right before he straps in, like 2 minutes before. And there's bleachers above his head. And he's like, oh, dude, I'm so pumped. And he jumps up and he nails his head on the bleacher and there's a screw sticking out and blood is just pouring down his head. And we're like, oh my gosh.
Well, that's the story behind the bandage on his head.
Yeah. And we're like, are you okay? And he's bleeding everywhere. And he's like, oh, so lightheaded. And we're like, dude, you need stitches. It's wide open. And he's like, they're like, up next, Daniel Grant. And he's like, the guy before him is coming back on the cable. He's like, I got to ride. And he like runs over and he's strapping in and like somebody tries to get a bandage on his head before and he just puts his helmet on and he goes and wins. And then he comes back on the dock and he's like so dizzy, like just crushes it. And he's like, I gotta go to the hospital.
Hold on real quick. Let me win. And then I'm going to go to the hospital real quick.
Yeah.
So I feel like that kind of wraps up Daniel in like a perfect little nutshell there. Like, yeah, pop my head open, but catch a dub real quick. And
This one's done.
so we're on coffee number 2 for those who are listening.
In case you guys are wondering.
Before we move on from the LF and Wheeler questions, I do want to ask, I have trivia. So I always want to ask the trivia. I always hope it lands on the trivia. It usually doesn't, but this is a pretty tough one, I would imagine. I had no idea that this is what it was. So anyways, who had the first published picture of a blunt slide in a mag? Wake skating, obviously.
Published picture of a blunt.
I can give you the photographer if that would help. You've mentioned both these people's names already in this podcast.
I have.
Yes.
Aaron Reed.
Yes. Wow. Okay. Shout out Cassette Lurk on Instagram. She has all sorts of like little nuggets of information. So that's where I pulled that
That's
from.
a hard one. Thank you, Cassette Lurk.
Yeah, that is a impressive get. You know who took the photo?
Josh Letchworth.
Wow. Okay. That is impressive. That's sick.
Thanks.
I love that. So yeah, shout out Cassette Lurk for that. She's got, if you're interested in wake skate like history or knowledge, she is worth a follow because
she's amazing.
All sorts of little nuggets of info.
She asked me questions over the years that I'm like, I didn't even know that was a thing. Like I've sent her leftover some old cassettes that I had that were like broken because she collects a lot of boards. So if you have any boards, contact her. If you have any cool history wake skates, she would love those. If you're not going to use them, they're going to sit in your attic, send them over.
Yeah.
But she'll ask me questions. She's like, this is an interesting board you sent. Like this graphic is actually this year, but this is this year's board because of the shape or something. And she'll like be like, do you know anything about that? And I'm like, what? Like, I don't even know. So yeah, she's a wealth of knowledge.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah. Her handle is @CassetteLurk. So yeah, if you got any boards, definitely, I'm sure she'd appreciate it. Really even just talking about wake skating. I'm sure she's super into it.
For sure.
So before we move on from Nike, did Nike ever pay for you to get American flags painted on your toenails?
Yeah. Well, yeah, we had this migration trip, where you bring all the athletes together, like I said. And one of the days they're like, we pay you guys to be on your feet and to wear our shoes. We got to take care of your feet and we're going to get pedicures. And I was like, that's so weird. That's like a girl. I'm like 16. Like I'm not getting a pedicure. And they rented out this like nail salon for us. So it was just chaos in there because it was just action sports guys.
Dudes.
All getting pedicures. And then they catered it with like food and drinks and all this stuff. So I remember sitting there, I was like, we were all kind of joking, this is going to be so lame. And then we're sitting there like in the chair, your feet are in the water and we're like eating great food. There's drinks. And we're like, all right, this is pretty sweet. And then she's like, you want anything painted on your nails? And I was like, you want to do American flags on my big toes? And then I walked up to Curtis. Curtis Graham was our Nike team manager, above Silas. Silas was the manager for wake skating, and then Curtis was like the overall. And I was like, hey, do you do waxing here? And she's like, yeah. I was like, can I have a wax strip? And I went and slammed one on his leg. And he's like, no.
Because once it's on, it's got to come off. Oh, man. So, yeah, you mentioned Gator boards. So you had the bi-level. What was the bi-level called? The
Deuce Pop.
The Deuce Pop. So why did you like the bi-level so much? I talked to Reed about this a little bit, but I'm curious to hear your take.
Yeah, I always thought it was kind of swing weight. It's almost like doing tricks on a trampoline on a skateboard, on a skate deck. Like doing a kickflip on the trampoline on a skate deck, it just kind of flips really, really easily, but it's like weightless. And then when you do it on a real skateboard, you feel the weight of that board with the trucks.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the weight of the board or having the separation. I almost think just the heavier boards kind of do it. But there could be something with the spring in the tail too. But it's almost like once you start riding bi-level, it's hard to go back.
Really?
Because I rode a concave for years. My first board I bought after that Hyperlight was a cassette concave. And then I broke those pretty quick. I broke like 2 of them. And then I went to the Byerly board concave at that time because it was just really indestructible. But once I got on a bi-level, it was like maybe like a few day learning curve. And then it was just addicting.
Yeah.
Like I felt like I had so much more pop, so much more control. You could ride in wind because of the swing weight. So then it was just hard to ever look back from that for a long time. Even today, like I've got my new Fatatesi board and I've ridden some of the remotes. Like Silas sent me a remote. And when I was in the hospital, he's like, if you ever get out of here and get better, like here's a board for you. To ride. And I've taken that remote to a bunch of cables, but it still feels like that. Like I feel like when I pop, it just is kind of quick, like it just kind of, it doesn't really like scoop into the water deep. And then when I got on this Fatatesi, that was the first concave I think I've ever ridden that I felt like, and I don't know if it's the rocker on the bottom combined with the shape on the top being a little more extreme. But it just had more of that feel. Like I got on this board, edged out and did a kickflip, and it felt like I was at home. And I was like, this is because for a little while I've been wanting to get on concave just because my last pro model with Connolly was a painted bottom, like a skateboard. So like it's great on the boat or jet ski, but if you go to a cable park one day of riding on
toast
rails, it just wipes the graphic off and then it's got a bunch of drag and it's over. So I always wanted to get on a board like this that was tough and had that kind of pop feel.
Yeah.
And my deuce pop, like if you're talking gator board stays, like I really always wanted skateboard feel. So we actually took a skate mold. So it's a skate mold, my deuce pop top deck. When I got on it, it was really curved, and we went to a skate deck company and was like, no, we want one of these presses, and we got a skateboard press. So actually Gatorboards made a few. I don't think they ever sold them, but we could get them, but they cut out skate decks too. But you could take my top deck of a bi-level of a deuce pop and you can cut out a skateboard. And when you pull the edges out, it is a skateboard deck.
Really? Mm-hmm. I had no idea about that. That's pretty cool. That's pretty damn cool. Speaking of your setup now, you were talking about it, might as well run through it now. So like what's the size, the weight, rope length, speed? What are you riding at these days, the whole setup?
Well, I ride probably 5 feet longer on the Sea-Doo. I'm still a big Sea-Doo fan. Like I still love to ride behind the Sea-Doo. So I'm riding like 70 to 73 feet on the Sea-Doo. Most people are riding like 65. I feel like the inside out wake is a little more lip back then. I rode a 42 my whole life. So I always rode a little bit bigger board than my weight. And this is a 40.5 and I like it.
You like a little bit smaller now?
Yeah, I like it. It feels cool.
And you rock just flat bottom, nothing going on underneath.
Yeah, I don't use fins. I do have these nub cutouts that I'm excited to go use on the cable, but they do create some drag.
Yeah.
And I was never a nub guy. Like I always just rode either one fin or no fin. And then when I saw the Fatatesis, I just have this vision of like, oh, it's kind of cool, the thought of being able to go up. A lot of these cables now have like kickers or like even flat boxes that you can go up and kind of pop off.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen some of that. So I kind of was like, yeah, leave the nub. Cause he's like, do you want them? I'm like, yeah, you're doing them on all your other boards. Like leave them. Cause I kind of think that'd be cool to get into, but that's not my specialty or my background.
Yeah.
You know, I started no fins and then I added fins cause no fins were not cool. And then it was like not cool to have fins. That's a whole nother thing.
I think Reed touched on that. It was fascinating for me to hear as a.
Oh, I remember my first Pro Tour contest on the jet ski. I went out, and back then it was really like you had to pay your dues. Like there was a lot more. I think there was a lot more discrimination back then in the beginning, where it was like until you were like known in the industry, you definitely struggled to get through heats. You had to prove yourself. And first Pro Tour stop, I did like 3 shove, back big, and a kick flip in my run. And then I got beat out. I don't remember who it was. Anyways, but I got beat out by somebody going into finals because they only did 3 shove and like a bunch of lip tricks and maybe back big, but I don't think so. And I remember going up to Sean Perry was the judge. And I was like, Sean, like not arguing with him. I waited till after the contest because I know that's not good. Like I can't stand when people try to protest and make a big stink. It's like, dude, you didn't win. Like talk about it afterwards and adjust. But so I was like, hey, Sean, what can I do next time? Because I felt like I was pretty confident in that run. And he's like, well, you did your tricks, but they were like finless. So like, you know, doing a 3 shover and a big spin finless isn't going to hold a lot of weight. And I was like, oh, wow. Why? And he's like, you know, because when you have a fin, you got to get your board all the way out of the water in order to break it loose. So I went home, put 2 fins on my board and rode 2 fins for years. I was like, okay, I'll do every trick with 2 fins. And then to me, I think Reed said the same thing. I don't want to be redundant, but I mean, we were riding every day together, so we kind of were discovering things at the same time. But it was, so for both of us, it was seeing Nick Taylor. Like Nick Taylor came in, no fins, doing things really high, catching them really well, and got a lot of respect really quickly. And I remember being like, oh, cool, with Nick, he kind of paved the way for that. Like, let's take our fins
Legitimize that
off
a little bit.
So then I took one fin off at first. I was like scared to commit. I was like, I don't
One
want to
foot
lose
in,
all
one
my
foot out.
points. Yeah. So like if I did a varial flip, I would sometimes do it fin in the front and you land with the fin, take off without it. Cause I like the feel of doing tricks without it, but it's kind of nice to land with one.
Yeah.
So I did that for a few years, rode with one fin and then went back to none.
Now fully unhindered on the bottom there. So you were talking about you like trying new tricks and landing new tricks. How many MBDs do you think you have on a wake skate?
Gosh, you're talking so long ago. Like, I know that sounds bad. Like, that's probably something I should know.
You got to,
But I kind of thought you might ask this question, and I was trying to think about it, and I have no idea.
I tried to scour the internet to find an official number, but it's
One of the issues, so Brooke Geary,
oh yeah,
she ran Alliance Wakeskate Mag back then. And I actually Googled that because I was like, I'm scared you're going to ask this question. I was like trying to find old Alliance Wakeskate Mag because I think she wrote it one time. She like maybe didn't write exactly how many I had total, but she was like, hey, I want you to text me every time you land a new trick. And she like put a thing out where she's like, Matt Manzari's texted me like 25 times this month. It's almost every day this month of a new trick he's landed. But some of those, and that's where the line gets weird. Like some of those, like, okay, a grape flip gets landed, then doing it inside out, doing it in the flats or doing it down a drop is really totally different tricks. In wake skaters' minds, I don't know if it's for you. It's like doing a 10 off a double up or doing it in the flats. It would be totally crazy. Yeah. So it's just, yeah, some of them were like that. And then some of them were totally new tricks. Like, I don't know. I don't want to give you a number and be high, and I don't want to give you a number and be low. But I don't know, a bunch of tricks.
Bunch of tricks. I think that is a fascinating thing to quickly touch on because you were just saying, yeah, it's a never been done before trick on that specific element, I guess you could say, whether it's a drop or a wake or in the flats or like in the ramp inside out. Like, I just think that's a fascinating thing to think about. Because I don't like the trick's been done, yes. So like a kickflip's been done, let's say out in the flats.
Yeah.
It hasn't been done wake to wake yet. So when it's done wake to wake, the trick has been done, but it hasn't been done on that element. So is it a new trick? I don't know. Like,
yeah, I don't know. And to me, I'd consider that a new trick because if you've ever wake skated, like doing a kickflip in the flats and doing a kickflip wake to wake, I mean, it's like totally different. I mean, when you do kickflip wake to wake, it's so hard to edge all the way through the wake and not get kicked over the front and kind of do like a roll the windows down, fly over the front of your board. Because like when I kickflip in the flats, I edge out really far. I don't do them close to the wake. Some people do them close to the wake. I edge out really far and then flatten out totally. And then I do the trick totally flat, which is kind of how you do it on a cable. But when I do it wake to wake, I have to edge all the way through and almost wait till you're in the air. It almost feels like a late kickflip. But now because you're doing it late, like your back foot is totally different. You just kind of float it off. Whereas like when you're popping it, it's just a totally different deal.
Yeah. That kind of just opened my mind. I feel like, I'm just thinking back to, not the origins of MBD, but skateboarding. If you front board this rail and then you front board that rail, those are two MBDs.
Yeah. If you
right?
front board a flat rail or you front board down a 20 stair, that's totally different.
Yeah, even if it's a 20 stair at a different 20 stair with a different angle with different gaps between the stairs, like that's another MBD. So yeah, I think that's a good point. I think I think you're right. MBDs.
And then you do stuff off rails. It's like a varial flip's been done, but it hasn't been done off a rail.
It's definitely MBD.
Definitely different.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if you remember all the tricks you invented, but what's the favorite trick you've invented, if you have any? Or maybe a favorite trick you've landed for the first time?
Probably the coolest feeling trick is a really, really, well, I can go two ends of that spectrum. Like just doing a good kickflip, when you feel it like slap your back foot and then it comes down, it feels awesome. Or an inside out back big. Like that's one of the simplest tricks and it's going to always be one of my favorite tricks. Cause like you go on the jet ski and even edging way from the other side of the toes and just come in like you're going to do like a Rayleigh edge and try to do it like 15 feet across and like 3 feet in the air. Just send it as big as you can. Like, cause then when that trick comes around, you just feel it hit your feet and you're just like floating backside and it feels really cool.
Yeah.
But I mean, like technical wise, probably flip trick off a rail.
Okay.
A flat bar, not an incline.
Yeah.
Like doing
Classic flat bar.
like even just a backboard kickflip out is really cool. But like, my backboard backside flip is what I got trick of the year for. And that was like super cool feeling trick. Just cause you kind of feel that when you get it right and you feel yourself rock off that and you feel yourself get the flick, you like know it right away. You just feel it flick off your toe and you're like that was cool.
We're here. We made it.
That was a funny story though, because I was like, I think it's possible to do a backside flip off the rail. And we went over to Kevin Henshaw's house and I was like, Reed, can you pull me quick? I want to try this. And I landed it like third try, like perfectly clean. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that just happened. I was like, we got to shoot this. And I called Golden Bear to come shoot a photo and my brother to come film it to try to do trick of the year submission. And I tried it for 3 hours straight. I probably tried it 200 times and finally got one. And the one I landed wasn't nearly as good as the first one. The first one, it just, you just feel it. Like it felt like it popped higher in this. And I mean, it was cool. Like it still won, but it was like, I was so naive. I did it and I was like, oh dude, that trick's not that hard. And then I was
Third
like,
try. It
just must have been the right spot at the right time. That trick's so hard.
Speaking of tricks, we got a Patreon question from Austin Farr. So if you're interested in supporting the podcast, the Patreon is the best way to do so. If you're on the gold tier, you get to see who the guests are early, and you can submit a question like Austin Farr did. So thank you. Not Austin Fardis. Austin Farr did. So thank you to all the Patreon subscribers. He's wondering, what was the trick that gave you the hardest battle over the years?
Hardest battle. That's even a good question of hardest battle to land or hardest battle to keep doing. Because hardest battle to keep doing is for sure a wake to wake 3 flip. Like there was a time where I was riding boat a lot and I could get one, like I could easily get one in a set, like maybe, give me 5 tries and I could get one. But over the years, as I stopped riding boat, like we went when Bob Sovin did his pro wake skate tour or pro wake skate worlds a few years ago, I had this mindset of I was going to jump in the boat and it was me like the old days. And man, it was a struggle. It was really hard. But hardest battle to land was varial flip underflip down a drop.
Okay.
Just because of the nature, like I did my first one ever and it wasn't a great one because I didn't catch it in the gate. I think in the last trick in transgression.
Yep, it was in transgression.
Inside out. But when you do it inside out, it's like you have that upward push off the lip. So you kind of try to, as it's flipping up, the board's coming up to you and you can flip it back around. And then even doing it at battle falls is similar, kind of throws it into your feet, but doing it down a drop, like everything's going down. So you really have to like pop a varial flip really high. And it took me, I tried that trick for years and years and years and years. And then I was at Ben Horan's and I think we were there for a contest and it was between heats and I just went to session for fun and landed one. And I was super stoked.
That's a wild one. Cause when I was watching back and then I watched transgression and I was like, that's the ender trick. So I was like, at first I didn't realize what it was. I was like, oh, is this like just a varial flip? Like what? That's weird ender for all the stuff you did before. And then I was like, backed it up. I was like, oh,
that was a Chris Haslam inspired trick.
My dumb wakeboard brain doesn't understand this one first try.
Yeah, I didn't understand it either. Like when I first saw it, like I saw Chris Haslam do it in his, I don't remember what skate section, but he's like in a line and he goes like over a gutter and goes varial flip underflip. And I remember watching it like 100 times and I was like, that's cool. That needs to be done on a wake skate. And then that's when the journey started, like do it on the trampoline. And just keep trying it and trying it and trying it and trying it. Try
and get down. Love it. Kind of a good time to talk about like your peak in terms of like wake skating and your career. Because I watched, you've actually got a lot of like videos on your life, documentary style things. And I think in one of them, it kind of mentioned, or you mentioned about how you were feeling personally about, your path in life and kind of everything regarding where you were at when you were at I don't know if peak is the right word, but you were at a high level of wake skating. You were getting, good deals with contracts and stuff. And did you feel like you were fully fulfilled, I guess is maybe the word that.
Yeah. It's funny. Like I said, I never planned on being a pro rider. I just love to be on the water, but in the back of your head, it's like if you're a little kid playing Little League and then you suddenly end up like playing for the Mets or Yankees or like some big team, I don't know. It is kind of like all your dreams come true in a sense. Like, so for me, I was getting to do this sport I loved and travel the world, and I had, money to live and cool brands backing me. And I think I always had this like, oh, this could just happen. Like it never felt like I made it in a sense. And that was like my own restlessness or whatever. Like I remember being like, if I could just get like when I started to have the wave skate thing happen initially, it was like, if I get a big sponsor, like a Mountain Dew or Nike, and then I did. And then it was like, but all the good pros have a pro model. If I can get a pro, and then I did. And if I get a magazine cover, and then it was trick of the year was a big one. I was like, no politics, whoever does the best trick of the year, that's the best rider. And so all these things, as they would happen, I would think like, this will for sure almost like coast after this. And then as that stuff happened, you're like, cool, I got this magazine shot, and next month someone else in the magazine, and I got this, and it was just never enough. And I know that's like the cliche story of, celebrities that seem like they have everything and they're not happy, struggling with depression, anxiety. And it wasn't like I was at a point of depression, but definitely a point of like, is this all life's about? 'Cause it's not as awesome. And I kind of like, I am a person of faith. So at that point, like I felt like God put on my heart, like, hey, if your life is going to be about you and what you can get out of it, it's going to be pretty lonely. And like, if me and others aren't a part of it, it won't be fulfilling. So that's when I started going down this different road where I was like, I don't know what I want to do, but I know I want to like serve and help people. And it really was a difference. And I think anyone that does coaching gets that. Any like pro riders that also coach, yes, they coach probably because they need to financially, but also there's something like we all got into this because we love being on the water. And to this day, if I went out tomorrow and land a new trick, I'm stoked. But when I take a family out that has never been on the water, and maybe the kids are like nervous because they can't swim well or they're scared of alligators, whatever, and you get them up on a board and you see that like true joy. It's like a contagious smile. It's like, that's what it's about. Like that's the whole idea behind Pass the Handle. Like we were just talking about Kevco, and this is his scurfer. Shout out to Kevco. But he pushed that Pass the Handle for so long and still does. And I'm a firm believer of that. Like we want this thing to grow. And that's part of my struggle with, I look at my olden days of being so core. Like when I got down the wake skate journey, I mean, we still had contests together where like the wakeboarders and wake skaters were all friends. I still had a huge respect for my buddies that were wakeboarders, but I didn't want to wakeboard. It was like at my level, like, dude, it's so sick. You just landed this, but that's not my deal. Like you guys are strappers. Like it's almost like fruit bitters and skateboarders in a set. I'm going to take some slack for saying that, but no. And wakeboarding is awesome and super challenging. And I love wakeboarding. Actually, when I hadn't wakeboarded in probably 5 years, and then I got electrocuted and laying in a hospital bed for a year, almost like just being in a hospital bed and being in recovery and being like, am I ever going to be on the water again? When I got close to being on the water, I wanted to wakeboard more than I wanted to wake skate. And it's almost like if I like tied your arms down, I mean, I was literally like, I had no range of motion, and I was like learning to walk slowly and learning to jump. And I felt like I was like rubber bands around my body for years. And it was like, I just want to boost. Like, I just want to like get out of this and go in the air.
Yeah.
And I actually like kind of fell in love with wakeboarding again after my accident, after I kind of like retired competitively and thought maybe I was done. I don't know what water sports look like if I could ever do it again. I knew I was going to try, but I got a wakeboard and just like, I just want to go do some 180s and
some air,
try
man.
some flips and just, I want to go in the air.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I feel like
So that I kind of got on a tangent there, but back to your question of, yeah, there was a point in my wake skating where it was kind of like the curtains pulled back and you're like, it's all smoke and mirrors. Like, is this all life's about? And there was a point when I started being like, when my life becomes about other people before myself, I see the value in that. I see it's way more fulfilling. It's way cooler. And yeah, I still love to ride, but I'd rather take people along with me on that journey.
Yeah. That feeling of whether you're, I've talked about it before, but working at a cable park and you see that it's like a light bulb or however you want to say it, of when they get off, they make it around or they make it for the first corner and they're ecstatic. It's like no trick I land will ever feel that way to how you're feeling and how I'm watching you feel right now. Like, it can never compare.
For you to say that too, it's so funny because a lot of people think like, oh, these core cable guys are so good. And then beginners are so intimidated. They're like, I don't want to ride. All these guys are really good if there's just regulars there. And you, as somebody who worked there and was a regular, for you to say that just speaks so much into it, because we're always trying to tell them like, look, we're doing this because we were where you were once and we made it around the cable once. And we were like, dude, no way I did it. And we were so stoked. So we want that for you. Like, nobody's going to be like, oh, that's lame. You barely stood up. Like, whether you're working on an NBD or getting around the cable, we're all here for the same reason.
Same thing. Yeah, exactly. 100% the same thing. And yeah, I feel like a lot of people feel that way, but sometimes it definitely helps if you're at the local cable or on the boat or whatever, just to try and put yourself in that person's shoes of it's their first time doing it. A little extra encourament or like, hey, I was there.
Just to voice it. Just to voice, because even if, like you said, we're thinking it, if we don't let them know,
they have no idea.
Because there are, I mean, I've seen it, and you've seen it for sure at cables. You've probably seen people riding for their first day, and then some, crew shows up of really good people, and then suddenly that person goes and kind of grabs a sandwich and watches the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And it's like, if we can just be intentional as riders to reach out to the guys and girls that are starting and just be like, hey, dude, you're doing awesome. I saw you try to hit that kicker. That was really cool. Like, hey, maybe absorb it a little bit on your first hit and like give them some tips. And yeah.
And even if you're not like, that is for sure great. And even if you're not in the mood to like sit down with someone and give them a bunch of tips as you're riding by, if they fell either on the corner or off a feature or whatever, be like, that was sick. Like, you're doing great. Just a smile, wave, like
thumbs up.
Yeah, it's kind of kooky, but like whatever, dude. Like they're having fun. Just let them know that you're a friendly person. But let's talk video parts. So we talked transgression. Let's talk aquafrolics. So this opening line, do you remember how many tricks in a row it was of your part in aquafrolics?
No.
6.
6?
I'm wondering how long it took.
Honestly, by the time we got to aquafrolics, we were riding a ton.
Yeah.
Like, I think we were all getting, like, I'm not trying to speak to my riding. It's weird to talk about yourself. Like, let's talk about like Ben or Nick or
No,
Andrew.
This is the Matt Manzari podcast.
So because it's just hard not to sound like you're like, oh, I was consistent.
Yeah.
It's weird to say that. But yeah, I don't think that took a lot. I remember that opening line, I think, is at Kevin Henshaw's Lake Winona in Claremont.
Okay.
And I remember filming and just doing a line kind of in the middle of one of my sets, and whoever was filming, I don't remember who was filming that day, maybe Matt Staker, he's like, oh dude, that whole line's going in. I'm like, it is? And he's like, yeah, we got to run that whole line. He's like, that flowed really well. I was like, okay.
Yeah, I think it did. So in this video specifically, we talked about flipping out of flat bars, but in this video, I feel like you did it, handful of times, several times. Why was that? You did touch on it earlier, but why was that a direction that you kind of wanted to take your riding, flipping out of hand or flat bars?
Well, that was, for one, nubs were coming in pretty, like that was right when nubs were like becoming cool. And a lot of people were like trying nose slides. At that time, like tail sides were still pretty rare. Like a couple guys were doing tail sides, but I was like, hey, I think there's more we can do before we need nubs. Just in my mind personally, I still liked watching what they were doing. I was just like, hey, I think there's a lot more to do on flat bars, and I like technical stuff. And I saw Ben do the first kickflip off a flat bar. I don't know if he's the first one to ever kickflip a flat bar, but it's the first one I saw. He did that toe jam, and in his run, which was crazy. And I remember seeing that trick, and I was like, oh, that's cool. I want to start going down rabbit hole.
Yeah. So that was, you just got a little inspiration from Ben and
Yeah, and I really liked rails. Like just doing like you talk about tricks, like what's your favorite tricks to do? Like a front board back big is one of the coolest feeling tricks because you kind of like get on front board and then you kind of start the back big as you're coming off and just being a blind landing, like landing backside like that. It just feels cool.
you can't beat it.
So just I had a lot of fun because we built a lot of flat bars because Andrew, Nick, and Ben all also like flat bars. So we were just kind of all in this time of doing our own thing on it.
Yeah. Love it. So you mentioned getting electrocuted, which I think we'll definitely talk about in a little bit here. But before that, which I actually had no idea, this was at the Projects boarding school contest. I wasn't sure what the contest was, but I had never heard of this until I was doing some research. But you had a pretty gnarly injury there.
Yeah, it's funny because like people that were there the whole time kind of make jokes of like, oh, watch out, Matt's accident prone or Matt's, and it's kind of funny because I had like probably the lowest injuries of any of my friends. Like you have a lot of friends in wake that blow knees out or dislocate shoulders or whatever. And I never dealt with that. Like I never really had injuries through my whole career. And then I had this like huge injury at the Projects. And then 2 years later, this other huge injury.
Yeah.
So I've really just had 2 big ones, but no real small ones. Like I put my arm through the handle, like I said, when I was really young, right when I started wake skating, and that was it. But yeah, I was at the Projects. If you've ever ridden there, you know where it gets narrow. And that's one of the coolest parts about that lake is because, you know, in a contest pass, you can run, it gets really narrow, you get right behind the boat and it can turn around after it opens up. And then none of those rollers make it back into the contest pass. So that's why we love the Projects. It's like the most ideal lake for riding. It keeps you can always find a calm direction to ride. It keeps it really, you don't get rollers for the turnaround, and the crowd's really close because the lakes are narrow.
Yeah.
So it's pretty ideal. But I've also ridden there like hundreds of times. It feels like, I don't know, because Toe Jam was there for years, and that was like the Toe Jam / like Wake Skate Tour stop. I think that was still Toe Jam years when I got hurt. But I came into the end of that pass and I knew in my mind like how many tricks I could fit in. And what they told me happened, because I don't remember this. I remember going, I'm going to do a nose grab front 3. That's all I remember. And what they told me happened, the guys in the boat, is I started to edge in and the wave curled over and I kind of like stopped, edged back out and like said speed up and then kept edging. And I think when the wave curled, I just looked right at the boat or right at the wave, right at the wake. And I was like, called speed up. And as soon as I saw it clean, I kept edging, not realizing like that ate up all that time I had. And Kyle Rattray was driving and he was like, he said he looked back and he knew while I was in the air, he's like, the boat was now well into the canal. And in my mind, I guess what was happening is I knew I was close. I knew it was at the end, but you know how it is. Like you kind of feel like you know how quick you can get back in a wake. And on a front 3, I feel like specifically that trick, I kind of don't edge out very much when I land. I can like land and then rip back in. And that was probably my plan. And he just said, he's like, I knew you were going to land on the rocks. And he pulled the throttle back, which probably saved my life. Because he's like, I made the call when you were in the air, pulled the throttle back. And I like my board hit. And like as soon as I hit on the water, I pretty much just smacked the rocks. Broke my skull in 13 places, got 16 screws and 3 plates to rebuild my face and skull. Broke my jaw clean on both sides. Had to get part of those screws were to rebuild my jaw. Dislocated my hip, broke my tailbone. My tailbone is what dislocated my hip. It snapped to the right and pushed my right hip out of the socket. Broke my hand in 5 places. So it was like, I was at that crossroads kind of what we were talking about. Like that was going to be my last contest. I was like, hey, I'm going to transition to like a ministry job and like help with people and I'll still wake skate forever, but let me go ride one more event. And then that happened.
Never say one more, right?
Yeah, never. It's always, never say one more. And that was a struggle. That was a rough injury because like most of the time when you break your jaw, you get like lucky enough to drink through a straw for a few months. But like, because I broke my nasal passage in so many places, like the suction, they said if I sucked in, it could cause shifting in those bones in my cheek and eye socket that they had to rebuild. So I kind of spent like a few months, like kind of pouring liquid between my teeth to eat. Like couldn't eat solid food for months. I used a walker to walk at first and then a cane. And when you're young like that, I mean, I was 22. You go from being a pro athlete, like on top of the world, kind of invincible in a sense where you just feel like you don't really deal with injuries or being too sore. And it was super, super humbling. And then I did end up riding again in a contest because at the end of that season, the last stop of the tour, I started riding the day before the event and was like, I think I want to enter just for myself. Like, even if I don't make it in, just to feel like, hey, we conquered, like we went full circle. We're back on a board.
Yeah.
And I had been like a few weeks prior still using a cane. Like I was still pretty beat up. And it's funny, like I didn't win that event, but if you ask me what event meant the most to me in my whole career, it was for sure that one, because we had 3 wild card spots because once you're qualified, you're qualified. So we had 3 wild card spots, and I think there was like 30 or 40 of us trying for them. And I remember Silas, I think it was Silas who told me, he's like, hey, you're the first person that went from unqualified to an event to the 6-man super final. And I got the tie for 4th. I didn't make the final, like 3 head to head or whatever they had. So it was a tie for 4th, but it was still like that event meant so much to me because I felt like we went from like totally broken, like what does wake skating look like? Am I going to be, to kind of being like, dude, I made it through all these heats and I had to qualify first before I even got to the heats. Yeah. So like it just meant a lot personally.
Absolutely. So I'm curious on the injury itself though. So you went face first into, or maybe not face first, but head into rocks.
Yeah.
I feel like more often than not, that would result in, a lot of brain problems, right? Like brain issues. So did you have, I mean, obviously I'm sure a concussion at some level, right? But what was like the diagnosis, I guess?
It's funny you ask that because not a lot of people ask about the head stuff. But yeah, I collapsed the right side of my face basically. So like under my eye socket here, my cheekbone collapsed over here. And I remember going into a follow-up with my surgeon after he'd rebuilt everything. And it was amazing because the way my jaw was broken, like I didn't have a lot of scars from that one. Because the way my jaw broke, it basically, the top hinge broke clean on both sides. So he made an incision like above my jawline and dropped it down while it was unhinged. Huh. And he put all the screws through my nasal passage up to my cheek here. And then he cut along the eyebrow line so you wouldn't see the scar. And he put my plate in here, and screws through here. So like I had all this work done and you really couldn't see it because it had all these internal stitches and then just my eyebrow basically. But there's, I don't know if I've ever talked about this, but there's a level of almost like survivor's guilt type thing. So I was just on a Nike trip before that. And Kevin Pierce, I don't know if you know who that is from snowboarding. So Kevin was like my age and we were buddies. And I remember that year he had beat Sean White at 1 or 2 of the events and Sean beat him at 1 or 2. And I don't remember if it was Olympic year or if it was coming up to Winter X, but he was coming up to something big that year. And there was a lot of talk in snowboarding that was like Kevin could be the first guy to take out Sean White, like as a solid, like
it was a big deal.
He's going to be the new Sean.
Yeah.
And there hadn't been a new Sean for years. And we'd just been on this trip together. And then I had my injury and our injuries were within maybe 2 months of each other, not even. And Kevin was training for an event with a helmet on and clipped the top of the pipe and hit his head on snow and didn't break anything, didn't break his skull, but just the impact caused so much brain swelling that Kevin will never be the Kevin he was. I mean, he had a really bad traumatic brain injury, bad TBI. And it was years before he's like back on a snowboard. And even then it's like, hey, he's getting to where he can ride down the mountain, but he won't be the same Kevin Pierce. And that's not a bad thing. Like I'm stoked for whoever the new person is. I talk about the old and new a lot in my life, but I remember really struggling with like, I remember trying to send his mom an email to just say, I'm so sorry. He was still in the hospital at the time. And just like being in tears at my keyboard, because just feeling so guilty. Like I just smashed my face into rocks with no helmet on, the boat's going 20 something miles per hour. You're edging in, so you're going faster than that. And Kevin hits his head on snow with a helmet on, and just his life changed. So there was almost like I was so overwhelmed with gratitude that I was okay, because there should have been a major brain injury. And my surgeon said that. He's like, because I remember sitting down, that's what I started to get into. And I was like, where did I crack my skull? And he's like, pulled out, he had his little like skull there, because he's a brain surgeon and a trauma surgeon. And he's like, you didn't really like break one piece or the other. It's not like, oh, you broke your eye socket here. He's like, when I opened up your skin and I could see your bones, he's like, it looked like I looked into like, think of a new box of Rice Krispies treats where it's just like, he's like, he's like, I say you broke it in 13 places because there's like 13 clean lines, but there was little minor fractures everywhere. He's like, your skull just like crunched and collapsed. And he's like, you hit everything, you crush everything above and below this temple here where that could be fatal. He's like, it's amazing. And he's like, I dare to say a miracle that you're here, because you definitely should have either been dead or had a traumatic brain injury hitting the rocks that hard. And he said, and part of where you broke your skull did allow brain swelling, which that is actually helpful. Because when your brain swells, it if it pushes up against your skull is when injury happens. So, you don't think it's good when you crack your skull, but it actually can be good. Because I think if Kevin and had his skull cracked, would there have been a different result? I don't know.
Kind of a worst case scenario, best case scenario situation where it's like, it sounds like just everything went right when it went wrong is what I'm trying to say, is like, could have gone way worse, is what your doctor was saying. So how long was it? You mentioned obviously recovery in the hospital, and then you went back to that contest. What was that time frame? Do you remember in between?
I don't know the exact number of months. I always say my full recovery was 8 months. Like 8 months later, I was like fully back on the water, but I don't think the contest would have been spaced that far. So I got hurt in and it was, it was Byerly's birthday. So April 4/20.
April 20th.
Yeah. April 20th, 2012. So early season, April. And then I think that event was like maybe September or late August was the last stop. So that's kind of the gap.
Yeah. Not even a full year though.
Yeah.
So what happens next after that contest, after the recovery? You get back on the horse, so to say, at the contest. What happens next in your life? Because it sounds like you were already choosing a different path and
wake skating was always going to be a part of my life. I thought it was going to be my last pro model. So I was on Connolly CWB at the time, and I actually made a deck that was 2 roads, crossroads. It looks like an X, a road going this way and this way, to kind of represent like this kind of change in my life where I'm like, I'm going to go work for a nonprofit, dig wells in Africa. I always thought Africa was where I was headed, because like I made my living playing in clean waterways, and I read this book that was given all these stats on the water crisis, and it was like every 2 minutes a child dies of lack of clean drinking water, and that just like stuck with me. And I'm like, dude, I got paid to like go jump around and play in clean, cool waterways, and like in the time I've had this thought, like a kid died. So I just really was attracted. I thought I wanted to go do water work. And then I had my accident, and that kind of changed things. It was like, my wife and I were totally broke, like had medical bills. I got just like random jobs, flipping stuff on Craigslist, wake skating for fun, like got a job at a Chevy dealership, writing service work, and was just kind of like, what's next? And then it's funny because right before my accident, that was 2 days or 5 days before before graduation, because the Toe Jam event was the weekend before finals. So I was supposed to compete Friday, Saturday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday were my finals week. And I was going to drive back, take finals, graduate. And then I had some offers to go into jobs with nonprofits, and then I got hurt and all that went away.
Yeah.
So then I was like kind of scrambling at the end of that year of what's next. I spent about a year scrambling and recovering after my recovery. So 2 years later, and Kevin Durham from This Is My Story, he gave me a job offer, and he's like, hey, it's like a mission raise support. You know, you got to get churches and individuals support you. You got to raise your own salary, but spend about 2 months trying to raise salary and then come on board full time. We tell athlete stories, and I'm a big story guy. Like, my question is always, what is your story? That's what I asked you this morning. I'm like, hey, what's your story? That's my favorite question in the world. I want to know your story. So I was going to go work for This Is My Story, and I signed a contract with him, and a week later is when I got electrocuted. So it's kind of crazy. Like, I was 2 years apart within a week of graduation, with a week of taking this job, where both times right before going into like a service job when I got hurt.
Yeah. So I think this is a great lead into that. But I think this is also a good opportunity to do a segment called Deserve Some Love, presented by Driftline. So Driftline makes wetsuit lined board shorts that are perfect for those spring sessions on the water. I rock these when it's cold out. It's been a little bit warm here in Florida, so I haven't been needing them right now, but I'm sure it'll dip back down into the cold temp. So if you want to try a pair, make sure to hit the link in the show notes to get 15% off your order. Like I said, I do rock them, so I'm a big fan. But this segment is Deserve Some Love. So anybody in your life, could be wake skating, could be, personal life, that deserves a little bit of love. Like basically a shout out, but maybe a little bit more to it than just their name.
For sure. Bobby Jean, my wife, like, she's a rock star. I mean, we were so young when we got married. I mean, we were 18. I dated her like 3 weeks. I'm like, I'm going to marry this girl. And all my wake skate friends are like, are you an idiot? Like, you crazy? And I was like, no, she's the one for sure. I'm getting married. And I'm like, I'm going to propose. And they're like, give it some time. So I waited 3 months, and then I bought a ring. And then kind of all in guy, I guess. But it really was like, I think wake skating makes you grow up quick. Like, you turn pro at 15, 16, and all your heroes are like 28 to 30. So your peer group is like in their mid 20s to late 20s, and they're settling down. And it was like, by the time I got to 18, my non-wake friends were like, I want to like go to college and like, find myself and see the world. And I'm like, I've been all over the world. I don't need to find myself. I'm right here. Like, what does that even mean, to find yourself? I'm like, no, I want to have like a wife and kids. And so Bobby's been amazing, because we got married young, and she's been with me through all my accidents, and like to kind of put Bobby in a picture. So when I got electrocuted while I was in a coma, they thought the brain damage was really severe. They didn't know yet. And she said when the doctors told her that, she just had this, like, was just sitting in the waiting room kind of numb, and just kind of like your mind is wandering. And she just had this like vision of us just as old people sitting on the porch. And she said she was just spoon feeding me and just hoping a little bit of Matt was in there. And I thought that's so, like, you talk about commitment and love, and like I always say love is a choice, not a feeling. And there's feelings in that choice. And that is such a clear, like, even if my life isn't how I saw it, like walking away for her selfish needs to say, well, I got to look out for me and do it. Like, that was never even the picture. She's just like, hey, Matt's a vegetable, and I'm pregnant, and I'm probably going to be raising a baby now, like a single mom with a brain dead husband. And what does it look like to share my life with him? So Bobby Jean, shout out. She's awesome.
Yeah, no kidding. So I mean, you've been kind of alluding to it here, but this is obviously another huge point in your life, I guess is the easiest way to put it, but getting electrocuted. So for those who don't know, I'm sure a lot of people do, but kind of walk through, I guess, just what happened.
Yeah, I mean, getting electrocuted is a huge shock.
Lighthearted about it too, apparently.
No, it was pretty crazy. Like, being in Wake, we've rented high reaches. I mean, back before, new kids in Wake might not know this, but drones didn't always exist. So back in the day, we used to have high reaches at all the contests.
Gotta get up there somehow.
Sit up there with the camera all day. People would. And we would always mess around, take them up, jump out. So my wife worked at the church, and they needed trees trimmed along the sidewalk. and they didn't have a lot of budget to do it. I'm like, I love using equipment. Like we've built pool gaps and used things, and like I'll just run a high reach and help trim trees. So I rented this high reach and didn't realize that linemen use fiberglass insulated buckets. So we rented like a general high reach like we would use for wake, which is made of metal, and it's grounded. So it's not loud within like 50 yards of high tension wires. So I was probably, I don't know, 12, 15 feet away from an uncoated major 3-phase line. Later I'd find out it's the second highest amp line in Orlando. Because it powered that church and Florida Hospital across the street.
Oh.
So with all the MRI machines and all the big stuff, like it's a ton of amperage. And super humid day in Florida, you know, water helps facilitate, the moisture helps facilitate an arc, and that power line arced to the bucket I was in. And basically once it arcs, they say it's like as good as wired. The way it's been explained to me is like if you've ever been vacuuming and the cord comes out and you plug it in and you see that little spark if the switch was on, that's 110 volts jumping a half inch. So you take 14 to 21,000 volts and a ton of amps, and you put a giant metal ground in the air, it can arc like 30, 40 feet with a good enough environment.
Conditions, yeah.
Yeah, with good enough conditions. So that arced over. I woke up in the hospital. You know, my next memory is weeks later.
Really?
It was an instant jump. It would be like you and I sitting here right now doing this podcast, and you just open your eyes and you're like, "Where's Matt?" And they're like, "That was weeks ago. Like a plane crashed through. You've been in a coma. Plane crashed through the house." So yeah, I joke, and you know, waking up finding out I was electrocuted was a shock, but it really was. And everyone makes fun of me because I make no nipple jokes. I'm always like, "You're lucky you got nipples," and talk about my nipples getting burned off. But I do kind of have nipples. But where that joke comes from, and I don't know if I've ever shared this, but it's really hard to wrap your head around how injured you are. Because I wake up and I'm like strapped to the bed. There's tubes coming out everywhere. I'm still really fuzzy. I'm in and out of sedation, and you know, because I was in a coma for like almost a week, and I started to wake up and I wasn't ready. They're like, "Oh, he's going to die." So they re-induced me. So when you come out, you're really fuzzy, and I'm like, "Hey, I got to go to Alaska. My camp is in 2 days." And they're like, "Matt, that came and went. That's like weeks ago." And I'm like, "What?" And I'm like trying to wrap my head around this. And I'm like, they're like, "You got burned." And in my mind, I'm thinking like when you burn yourself on a stove. So I'm thinking my skin is really red and I'm burned, and I just couldn't comprehend what happened. And they're trying to explain to me 4th and 5th degree burns. And ORMC had never really had a 4th and 5th degree burn survivor at that point. They'd had a lot of 3rd degree burns. And I was like, they're like, "Your skin's gone." I'm like, "What do you mean?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" They're like, "The skin on your chest is melted off." And I'm like, "What do you mean melted off? Like, do I have nipples?" And my dad was like, "I don't think so." And that was like a really hard moment where I almost got this claustrophobic panic of like, I'm going to die. Like if my chest, skin, and nipples and everything's burned off, and I just have like exposed bone and muscle, like how have I not bled out? How will I not die? And that was like that was ingrained in my memory, because my next memory after that conversation is like 2 weeks later. Because I kind of got re-induced and had a lot of surgeries, and it was super fuzzy. So it was, that's where that comes from, the nipple jokes.
Well, Reed
I thought my nipples were burned off.
That's the one thing he submitted a bunch of things. He's like, "Just set the record straight. How many do you have?" He wanted to know.
I have like I don't know. What do I have? I have like a half. Like this is
I count that one.
roundish.
I count that one.
This one's kind of just like a nub.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, and you know, I mentioned the degree of burns. A lot of people don't know what they are. So like you have 3rd degree burns through the layers of skin, 4th burns through the muscle, and then 5th starts burning bone. And once you start burning bone, typically, unless it's on an extremity and you can amputate, it's not survivable, because most people don't die when they're burned. They die from infection days after. And when you kill your muscle, like your blood flows through your muscles. So when you kill your muscle tissue, your blood flows through dead muscle, which just starts building bacteria, and it's basically toxic to your body.
Yeah.
So it starts running toxic blood through your heart and kidneys. So to burn down to the bone, like my sternum bit went 5th degree, we had to shave part of my sternum bone out. They thought they were going to have to just cut a hole in my chest and put a metal plate there to replace it. But luckily we were able to just shave about 50% of the bone. So it's really, really thin there now, but there's still nothing on top of it. But I had 5th degree all down my arms. So lots of blood clots, lots of limited blood flow, lots of toxic blood, draining a lot of blood from my body. I don't have any of my original blood. It's been replaced over 3 times. We were trying to add I got over 40 units of blood. So how many times that replaces all the blood in your body. And it's kind of cool. Like I think about being a Christian and being like, oh, Christ died, his blood on the cross is like our redemption. And I'm like, I live because of other people's blood in me. So like, if you're a blood donor, thank you. Cause I'm alive because of the things you guys do.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I had all these 5th degree burns and there's so much we can get into from the hospital. I was 9 hours away from double amputee. When I went in, they were going to cut both my arms off, and that was the plan. And then my parents didn't want to sign off on it. And then a few days in, they're like, hey, we can't let his arms kill him. Like he doesn't have blood flow. He's got blood clots everywhere. His arms are turning black and dying, and we're going to cut him off. So we scheduled surgery for the next morning to amputate both my arms at the shoulders. And then it was really my parents that were like fighting. And then finally, like Dr. Howard Smith, he's kind of like the head of the trauma division there at the time. He kind of sat him down. He's like, look, it's out of your control. Like he's going to die if we don't take his arms. So we're taking him. And he's like, I called Dr. Llewellyn. It's like the middle of the night. He's at home. If he wants to pick up and come in and try something, great. He's our best ortho. I always give a shout out to Dr. Llewellyn. And he kind of came in and was like, it's a Hail Mary, but if we're cutting him off in a few hours, like, let's try this. And if it doesn't work, we'll cut him off. And he did a super deep fasciotomy. He made hundreds of lacerations up and down my arms. Just cut slices like every 1/4 inch or 1/16 inch and just sliced my arms up. And then he hooked a blood supply to my central line and just let me bleed for hours. And let me bleed while he pumped new blood in. And it eventually, the speed of the blood flow and the speed of it pouring out of my arms, like eventually we broke through the blood clots and started getting circulation and started getting life back. And like, I have my arms today because of that kind of experimental Hail Mary surgery.
Wow.
And I actually do a lot of amputee events, not a lot, but like me and Bethany Hamilton do these. She has a ministry, Beautifully Flawed, and she does Beautifully Flawed with the girls, and then we'll run like my curriculum, my stuff with the guys called The Forge. And even though I didn't lose my arms, like living through expecting to lose them, and then for the first couple of years getting motion back and having some dead nerves and kind of my left hand was limp. I went a couple of years later to cut it off, and that's another story. And I ended up keeping it, and then it eventually came back. But yeah, like I love doing amputee stuff because there is, there's a lot there that I'm super thankful for my arms, and I shouldn't have them.
Well, and you're almost there too, right?
It's almost there. Yeah, I actually went in to cut this. I had Dr. Llewellyn to cut this wrist off because I was like, when I got out, this tendon was totally severed in the electrocution. Like one side of it was way up my hand and the other my arm. And they didn't think they could connect them. So this hand was just kind of a dead hand. It was like a rubber hand. Like there's no way I could pick this can up totally empty with my left hand, like over a year and a half out of the hospital. And I could kind of wiggle my fingers like maybe this much. But I had no lift in the wrist. So the way I used it is I just kind of flipped my left hand and just kind of just stops there. And I could like put something in it, and that was it. And then I started talking to a friend that was an amputee, and he's like, there's great prosthetics. So I was like, maybe I'll just cut my hand off. And I was like, I'm right foot forward, so I don't even need my left hand as much. So I went in to Dr. Llewellyn to schedule and to do a consultation about doing an amputation on my left hand, like a year and a half out. And he's like, hey, you have a little bit of wiggle in your fingers. And he's like, I know your wrist tendons are severed. He's like, but if you take your good hand, or anyone takes their good hand and maxes out those tendons like this, you almost can't make a fist. And he's like, because they stretched until they snapped or severed, these are maxed out. And he's like, if we pull it back, I think your fingers will start working again. So he's like, so let's do a plate. So it's kind of funny. Right before surgery, he's like, "Hey, where do you want your wrist for the rest of your life?" I was like, "Oh, I didn't think about that because he can bend it." So I like picked this position. It kind of looks natural. Most people can't tell, but I have a plate from here to here, and then because I'm into action sports, I was like, "How strong is the plate?" He's like, "Oh, it's like 50, 60 pound break strength. You'll never break it." And I'm like, "If I fall skateboarding, I'm gonna snap it."
Yeah, it's going right away.
And he's like, "Oh, it's gonna hurt like crap, but I can bone graft you too." And I was like, "Let's do that." So he took an inch out of my hip and then bone grafted. So I grafted the hand bone to my arm bone here. So it's actually solid bone from my knuckles to my elbow now, and then the plate's on top. So it doesn't move at all, but I was a week out of surgery and my fingers started moving and now I have like a ton of grip.
Yeah.
But it doesn't move. It kind of makes it hard on handle passes now, or you scratch your back. Like I don't like to pass it. It's hard when your wrist doesn't bend, but I have a lot of motion in my hand and I'm glad I didn't cut it off.
Wow. So that was the same doctor
Same doctor.
So he's very much so thinking outside the box of like, or maybe not outside the box, but just like exhaust all options before,
And what was a really cool moment, I mean, it was a year and a half later, I'm sitting in his office explaining what's going on with my arms. And first I walk in, dude, and I'm a crybaby since I got electrocuted. Like I'm breaking down trying to thank this guy because I'm just like, dude, I owe you my arm. Like I wouldn't have arms if it wasn't for you. How do you thank somebody for your arms? And then he starts getting emotional, and he's the doctor that's supposed to be like disconnected and just like tell someone they have cancer with a straight face.
Yeah.
And he's like, dude, I'm not trying to brag, but I'm kind of the guy they call when they don't have options. And he's like, that night I did that fasciotomy. He's like, I cut deep. He's like, I cut through way more than your wrist tendon. He's like, I cut so many tendons and finger flexors and things that are essential to move your arms. He's like, I was saving your arms knowing you'd have limited to no use of them. Like I was hoping if we could just save them and you could kind of swing them. And he's like, but I can't even explain how you can move your arms. And he gives me a big hug. He's like, there's really no, I would have lost that bet 100 times. Yeah. He's like, the fact that you're sitting here moving your arms around, talking about just your wrist struggle. Like, so I'm super, super thankful for the recovery I've had.
Seriously. So I do kind of want to not back up in a sense of, so you get to the hospital after this happens for the 5th degree burns. You don't remember anything until, a few weeks after you're in it for a little bit, and then you go back into a coma. Am I correct there? Or
yeah, and there was like lots of ups and downs. Oh, there's a story. I've never shared this because nobody's in the wake industry, but I guess there was one time I woke up. I don't remember this. My wife told me, but I woke up like right when they were pulling me out, and I was like, I'm part of the rebellion. And she's like, what rebellion? And I'm like, I've been drinking the spearmint water. And she's like, oh my gosh, what did you drink? Like, there's no spearmint water. And this is not good. I need to know what you drank, Matt. And I like pointed to this drain, this big bucket that was draining fluids out of my body. I'm like, I've been drinking the spearmint water. She's like, oh my gosh, I got to get a doctor. Like, that's like toxic fluid coming out of your body. And I was like, Ann, hold on. You need to get me another bedpan because I gave mine to Parks. And she's like, what? And he's like, yeah. I was like, yeah, Parks is here too, but you can't tell anybody because he's also part of the rebellion. She's like, what rebellion? And I'm like, he came to my window and I gave him my bedpan because he needed one. So get me a bedpan and find out about the spearmint water. She's like, okay, he's just way out of it.
Parks is here. He's part of the rebellion.
And then I also heard a story. I don't know if Brad's shared this, but because me and Brad, like we got kind of paired together a lot through our injuries because we got hurt like a couple weeks apart.
Yeah.
And Brad was in the hospital, and one of the things he said when he first came out, I don't remember if it was Danny Harv or who told me this, but he's like, we went to visit Brad, and he was like, they're trying to do the same thing to me they did to Matt Manzari. And he's like, who? He's like, the wake skaters. They're trying to do what they did to Matt Manzari. You got to get me out of here. And he was like waking up from something kind of doozy on probably on some stuff like I was.
So, but speaking of, I mean, you were out of it, but your brain was still there. Like you're obviously you're a little bit loopy from whatever they're giving you, but
yeah, that was a huge thing. Cause when I was in the coma, like I said, I had thousands of volts, 14 to 21,000 volts and a ton of amps of electricity run through my body. And I'm kind of holding the controls of the high reach. If you got those joysticks. So it arced to the bucket, ran through me. So that's why the burns run down my arms through my chest. I had headphones on at the time on. So the headphone wire got caught up in it and went down, melted my iPhone to my leg. That's my only burn on my legs. So I get free iPhones now. I got an Apple symbol burned in now, but it did melt my iPhone to my leg. And then it came up, burned the earbuds into my ears. And then this isn't a scar from my first accident. This is burns from having metal in my face. So then it went headphones, burned my chin plate here, burned these plates in my eye, and then exited through the top of my head in the front and back. So I have a bald spot here and back here from my exit wounds. So that's why, like, when I was in the coma, they can do like pain stimulation. So they kind of poke you with stuff and see if you like react and how connected your brain is to your movement. And I wasn't really responding. And they're like, he had thousands of volts exit through the front and back of his skull that ran right through his brain. So at this point, he's not responding. We don't know how extensive, but we know the brain damage is pretty extensive. So my family was kind of looking at, hopefully Matt can wake up one day and learn some words and learn to walk, and almost like an extreme stroke person or something, where it's like, he won't be Matt again, but hopefully he's somebody.
Yeah.
So that was when I woke up and could communicate, that was huge.
Probably a surprise, I would imagine, to everybody in that room.
Surprise.
Yeah. So what, for the people who are not familiar, me being one of them, with electricity, at a deeper level than plugging it into the wall, what was the equivalent, or what could you compare the amount to, I guess?
When they made the documentary, like you mentioned, they wanted something like relatable, and we called OUC, the Orlando Power Company, and we're like, hey, can you get us, do you have like a survivor rate? And they're like, man, there's people that have survived like arc flashes where it like arcs to a box and blows you off the box. But as far as it conducting through your body completely, like that amperage and voltage, we really can't find anything. Like, they worked on it for a few days and called us back, and they're like, but the original electric chair was 2,000 volts and I forget how many amps. And they're like, you got 14 to 21,000. And with the amperage, it would be at a minimum like hooking you up to 6 to 10 electric chairs and turning the ball on. So it's pretty amazing.
Where one is intended to
kill you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm super thankful. And it's funny, I actually have a doctor who has a theory that my first accident helped me a lot, because when you're standing on a metal bucket with, like a metal mesh bottom, when you get electrocuted, it would typically, unless it trips the breaker, it would run ground through your feet and just hold you there until all the moisture is out of your body and you're not conductive anymore, like until you're like a dehydrated piece of fruit. And I've met linemen who are like, dude, we've pulled bodies out of buckets, and like big guys just breaking down because they're like, I can't believe you're here. But my electricity went path of least resistance. I've got all this metal in my face from my toe jam accident, and the electricity came up and then didn't have anywhere to go and exited through my head. So that, we think, broke the current. So maybe my first injury helped me live through my second.
Wow, that's wild to think about. It's very wild to think about.
It's a theory. I don't know.
Well, it's a good one. So you're open about this entire thing, as well as your first injury. I've heard you obviously other podcasts, documentary, and all that stuff. And I feel like you were open throughout the entire process as well, of just what's happening with my life. And I'm not sure everybody else would do that. So I'm wondering if that was, a decision that you consciously make, or that's just who you are. Or I'm just curious about that.
Yeah. I talk about what is your story? What is my story? Like, I am an open book because I think we need transparency. Like I do get to speak at like corporate events a lot, and I think about like corporate leadership and all that stuff. And I'm like, you have a leader, and a leader might have one or two approaches to leadership. Like, either I want to be really strong for my team, might be his like intention behind it. But if you try to make it look like to everybody else, like you've got it all together, well, either one or two things happen. Like, either everybody sees through it and thinks you're an idiot and arrogant, or worse, they believe you. And they're like, dude, he's got it all together. And how can I go to my boss or go to my team leader and be like, I'm really struggling, I don't get it. Like, he's going to just fire me because I'm not qualified. Like, and you end up with people feeling like they have imposter syndrome. Like, I don't belong here. because everybody else is doing so well. And why am I struggling and maybe they're not? So I think transparency is like the best thing in the world. Like the best thing we can do is to tell our team or to tell our friends or to tell our people like, dude, I'm struggling. I don't have it all together. I don't have it all figured out. Like that's why even with the wake stuff, I'm like, I'm not super special that I became a pro athlete. I just started to think differently and then different things started to happen. It's not like have this God gifted talent and you don't. You could do this. Like, let's go do it. So I do try to intentionally, maybe it is a little bit of who I am, but I also try to be really transparent because I don't have anything to hide. Like, why? What is the point of me withholding information that's free to give away?
Yeah. If it can benefit anyone in any way, it's who I am and it's my story, which I think is.
And another part of it is I really don't like how we always highlight the extremes. Like we're always going to have, I think about this a lot if I like get asked to go speak at an event. Like I just did an event for Four Rivers, for their leadership team, 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. And I think about stuff like that. Like they bring in speakers that have extreme stories, like whatever it is, like, oh, I was the drug, sex and rock and roll, addicted to heroin, addicted to meth. And now I started this huge nonprofit and, or I almost died. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool. Like there's a story there. People are interested and that's why they bring me in. But I hope they come maybe to hear my story, but leave hearing their own, because my message in it is I'm just a regular person and people will tell me things like, oh, I've been through stuff, nothing compared to what you have. And then they devalue what they're going through. But it's like, don't do that. Cause yeah, I know what it's like to have my skin melt off, but I don't know what it's like to watch my parents go through a horrible divorce when I'm a young kid, or to have, to lose somebody really close to me at a young age, or to get bullied in school. So it's just like, when I look at a world when mental health struggles is higher than it's ever been, and people are all trying to put this persona through their social media of like, I do the travel life, I'm an influencer, I want like, and we're not showing reality. Like, I just think we need it. We need authenticity in our life. And my struggle is different than your struggle, but that doesn't make my struggle harder. If you're going through the biggest thing you've went through and I'm going through the biggest thing I went through, like, dude, we're on the journey. So that's part of why I try to be really transparent, because I want to know your story. I wanted, my book is, it's called Beyond the Scars. Life isn't defined by your circumstances, but who you are is like a big part of it. And the who are you? I think that's the coolest question. And it comes from The Lion King. If you've ever seen Lion King.
Yeah, of course.
Like you have Simba and he's living this like Hakuna Matata, like no worries, kind of selfish life. Like we highlight that he's having fun, but it's like, dude, like you are just no worries. I'm not going to think about other people or tomorrow or yesterday. I'm just going to do what I want. And it's the whole thing of this generation. You do you, I'll do me. And it's like, I don't really like that mentality, because it's like, if I'm doing me and looking out for me, so I'll take advantage of you or use you or to get ahead for me. Like, that's not cool. So you have Simba, who's like living this kind of immature lifestyle, is this feeling like he's a kid. And Rafiki, the wise monkey, leads him up to the river. And in the original one, the new one, he actually sees it, but he looks down in that like reflection pond and he sees this full grown lion looking back, and he kind of gets surprised. He's like thinking he's looking at his dad, and he realizes it's him. So he feels like a kid, but he's looking back to this full grown lion that he actually is. And Rafiki says, who are you? And I'm like, that's a piercing question, because there's a lot of autonomy. There's a lot of decisions he has to make on his own now. Like, you can keep doing this, hang out with your buddies, Hakuna Matata, no worries, live the lifestyle you want, you do you, or your people are suffering under this like horrible ruler, and his tribe was starving and suffering. And he was really born to be this leader that could go lead them out of that and bring them to freedom. But he had to make that decision. He had to say, who am I? And when I got hurt, like that resonated so much, because I went to this national burn convention. I met all these other burn survivors, and I left like, yes, encouraged in some ways because I found this community, but really like brokenhearted for a lot of burn survivors, of just seeing people that go through a burn and it crushes them. It ruins their marriages. It ruins their life. And then you're always living in this like Napoleon Dynamite, like back in my day, I could throw a football over those mountains of like who I used to be. And then I got broken and now my life sucks. And it was like, how do I recognize there's kind of a death? Like Matt, in a sense, died, the old Matt. And there's a new Matt that I'm going to get to know. And he might not wake skate like the old Matt. He might not be on that level, but he can maybe relate to people better than the old Matt. He could maybe he's going to do different things, and that's cool. And that encouraged me through my recovery because I stopped comparing myself to, I used to be a pro athlete. Now I can't open a bottle of water. It was like, hey, what can I do? Oh, this is cool. I can do this. I didn't think I could do this. And then instead of like working to get back to zero to where I was the day I got electrocuted, it was just excited to discover what the new me can do. So I know we're going down a lot of rabbit holes, but that's off that transparency of like, discover who you are, and you're going to have chapters open and close in your life. We all do. And we all, and ask that question, who are you? Cause I love, we want to put the blame on everybody else, but it's up to us. Like we got to take ownership in our recoveries, ownership in our healing. And I realized pretty early on, like I was in a lot of pain. I had a lot of nerve damage that was permanent and I'm going to deal with it the rest of my life. And I hope some of it goes away someday, but they put me on disability automatically when I was in the hospital. Like the government did. And then I realized like, it was funny because as a wake athlete who had a bunch of write-offs, like I paid nothing in the system. I got like $520 a month. And I was like, how am I going to live on this? But anyways, I was trying to get off a disability and start speaking. And I was like scheduling speaking events between surgeries. And I realized like, dude, I'm in pain every day. So I can be on pain, trying to get back on the water. I could be in pain on stage speaking, or I could sit on a couch on disability and talk about how my life is ruined. And it's that same Lion King question, like, who are you? Like, I'm not special. I'm not strong. I'm not stronger than you or anybody else. But I sat there and just made a decision. I'm going to get off this couch and I'm going to do stuff. And I don't know what that looks like. And I'm going to fail a lot. And that's cool. Like, let's go discover it. And that's what I hope other people get from my story, that wherever they're at, their struggle's different. Could be finances, could be job, could be relationships. Like, okay, what can you do about it today?
Yeah. I feel like that who are you question is an interesting one because you're always changing, whether it happens fast, getting electrocuted or, traumatic injuries or whatever, or it happens slowly and you don't really understand it's happening, right? Like if nothing aggressive happens in your life, well, you'd still look back in 10 years and be like, well, I'm still way different than I was 10 years ago. Exactly. Just because I didn't get in a car accident or whatever doesn't mean that doesn't change. So it's important to, like you said, the new Matt, it's in 10 years, I'll be a new hunter. I'll be different, right?
For sure.
Even if I don't go through something that is like a traumatic thing in my life, still you're different. So you got to like always not reassess, but always meet that new version of yourself to see who you are, who you can be, and how you can help other people's lives. It's just a good reminder, I think, as you go through life, because you're never going to be the same, right? Yeah. You're always going to be different.
I love that you just said that, because I think about that a lot. I've had a lot of people ask me like, hey, what's your pain like today? And I'm like, I don't really call it pain. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, when you're 90, you're probably going to have lots of aches and pains, but that's not really like an injury. It's just being old and things getting creaky and your body deteriorating. And I just fast forwarded that process. So I'm like, yeah, I've got nerve pain, but my body hurts a lot more now than it did when I was 20, but it probably would have hurt more anyways, a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's more of like, is this pain or is this my new normal? And then how do I just hedge that?
New normal.
And deal with it.
So still, I think I got a few other questions on this and a little bit more to unpack, I think. But what was the support like from the weight community and your personal life, as you were coming out of this, kind of realizing what was going on? Was it, a big, overwhelming support from everybody, or what was that kind of like?
More than you can imagine. Like, I'll never, ever be able to give back to the wake industry what the wake industry has given to me, in a sense. And I'm not just talking about like in a dollars and cents or product. I'm talking about like, because when you think of like moving forward and growing, when you feel like there's eyes watching you, people supporting you, it's encouraging because you don't want to let them down. And on some days, even more than you don't want to let yourself down, there's days where you're like, dude, I can't. It's so much. It's so painful. But knowing like, hey, I've got this industry that has loved me and supported me and came in, I'm going to keep going. There was like a hashtag forever, like Matt and Brad. And that was a lot of that was started by Robbie Mushop from Operation Wake Surf. You know, Brad got hurt and a lot of people were doing stuff for Brad, and specifically because his injury happened while riding. But then Scott Byerly, so I got to shout out to Scott. He called Robbie because Robbie didn't know me because he kind of got into wake after my time when I was kind of phasing out. And Scott was like, dude, it's cool you're doing some stuff for Brad, but what about Matt? And he's like, yeah, what's Matt's story? And then so Robbie started really pushing that of like reaching out to all the pros of like, hey, donate a board, donate, you know, a vest, donate, sign something that's like really unique and auction it off. And they started like a GoFundMe, but it wasn't through GoFundMe. It was through You Caring. It's like GoFundMe. Dude, in the wake industry raised over $80,000, which was insane because like to give, I don't know if a lot of people know really what our life was like at that time, but I mean, I had $500,000 in medical bills. So any dollar we had got drained instantly. Like we came out of the hospital, we would have been totally broke. And the wake industry donated $80,000. My wife was working at the time, a full-time job. And then when we got out, I had 5 days a week physical and occupational therapy. And ORMC didn't have somebody that could do outpatient 4th and 5th degree burn stuff. So I had to go to Tampa to a burn specialist. So I living in Claremont, driving to Tampa 5 days a week, 2 hours each way, just for my physical and occupational therapy, hour to hour and a half session each. So I'm like 3 to 4 hours a day of therapy with 4 hours a day driving. I mean, that's 8 hours a day of driving and therapy while my wife's trying to work around that. And then Christy Overton Johnson, if you're old water sports, you know, the Overton family, you know, they're like, I would call them like an aunt and uncle in my life. Like they were huge in our recovery. Christy came to just do an interview for her, like Prison Ministry magazine. She does a magazine for prisons all over America to just do a story and bring us dinner. And then she's like, there's more here. And she's like, there's your story of going through this, but then there's your wife's story, like taking second fiddle when she's pregnant and life should be about her. I want her to write one. Then there's your parents watching their son suffer. Like, what is that like as a parent? And then there's your friends. Like she had Reed write an article who his biggest struggle right now is, am I going to win this contest this weekend or not? And my best friend is wondering if he's going to wake up tomorrow. So like she wrote a whole issue around struggle and it was all around my story. And then she gave my wife a job, which was huge. She's like, come work for the magazine as my administrative assistant. You can work remotely or bring your baby to work. So the only reason we made it at that time was Christy's support, Christy and Tim, providing a job for my wife, helping us get into our first home during that phase. My parents were huge. My parents like helped support a lot. And then the wake industry, like you talk about their support. I mean, they auctioned off tons of stuff, and that $80,000, I mean, we milked that. We invested a good bit of it, and then would pull out what we could. So we tried to keep it growing as we used it. And probably 2 to 2.5 years, like we lived off that and milked it. I mean, it was like shoestring budget. We're in the cheapest apartment in Claremont, you know, old cars. But like, if it wasn't for the wake industry, I mean, I don't know what life looked like.
Yeah, huge pillar of that.
It was a huge struggle. Like I'm so thankful to everybody that donated. If you're one of those people that either donated or donated your boards to get signed, that was really, really awesome. Rusty and Lindsay were huge. We had our baby, and then we got pregnant again. And Lindsay's so organized. So she had all of her kids' clothes in storage by like age group, like, hey, here's 8 to 12 months, here's 12 to 16, here's 16 to 18. And it was from back when Rusty was on Fox. It was all like really good, cool little boy stuff. I mean, it was like all Fox stuff and name brand stuff and we were like broke and didn't have money for baby clothes. So like, I think my kids wore all of Rusty's kids' hand-me-downs for like, until they were like, probably now.
That's awesome. That's super awesome. Got a Patreon question from Ryan Shimabukuro, which last time he said I said that right, so I think I said it right again.
That's cool.
He's wondering, was there a moment where you didn't think you'd get back on the water again? You kind of answered that, but I'm curious maybe when the moment was where you realized you could or you might be able to.
Yeah. There's the first setback on the water is documented. I don't remember where it ended up or didn't end up, but Aaron Rathie came to film it, which was super cool. Reed drove my boat, and I wanted kind of like to replicate a jet ski wake. I had a little fishing boat, and I rode behind that first. But it was, I say it in that, it was like 1,032 or 1,064 days or something that I was off the water. So just over 1,000 days. And in the beginning, there was like, what does getting on the water look like? But I always envisioned I would be on the water again. And even if it was like, get on like a big like surfboard, even if it's almost like paddleboard. This is back when it's like, I might lose my arms or I might whatever. But I'm like, whatever getting on the water looks like, even if it's like do a dock start and like just get pulled around at like 12 miles per hour, like I just want to ride. And then as I got better, it shaped into like what riding would look like when I got back.
Yeah. So chicks dig girls with scars. That's a fact.
Chicks dig girls with scars?
Or guys with scars. Sorry. Chicks dig guys with scars.
I mean, they might dig that too.
They might dig that too. But I'm wondering if your wife has had to fight any chicks off, since.
No, I don't know. I don't know. I think my scars are kind of cool. And I do try to be like a pretty big body image advocate. Because if you go, there are like burn camps. They do camps for burn kids. Because the burn community is kind of like the wake community. It's a niche, kind of small community that's like big but small. So if you go visit a burn camp, usually day 1 and 2, even if it's like a summer camp where it's really hot, kids are in long sleeve shirts. Kids are not wanting to go swimming. And by the end of the week, kids are in bathing suits, the girls are in bikinis, and they're just like proud of their scars. And that's a big thing for me is like, dude, I worked hard for these scars. Like what I went through. So I'm not embarrassed. Like, yeah, I look weird and that's cool. And maybe some people think it looks cool. I've had people say it looks like I'm really ripped. And I'm like, that's because of the lack of muscle. Cause we cut a ton of muscle out and the skin forms to what's left or forms to the bone. So it makes me look more defined, but doesn't mean I'm any stronger. I'm actually a lot weaker. But I've had doctors that there's a lot of burn people that try to do cosmetic surgeries. I've had so many surgeries and I'm like, let's be clear. I will never do cosmetic surgery. Like they have lasers that can help fade the lines between your grafts and like make these less visible. And I'm like, dude, these are cool. And I'm different and everybody's different. And that's okay. So trying to encourage kids to be comfortable in whatever body they're in. And it's like, yeah, if you want to lose weight, I'm not saying like, oh, well, you're stuck in that, just be happy. Like if you don't lose weight for a reason, I've met kids that are like, oh, so should I just be happy and stay here? And they're like, I want to skateboard. I'm like, well, if you want to skateboard, there is like, I'm not knocking overweight people, but I'm saying, yeah, if you want to do it and you can change it, do it. But if you can't change something about your body, great. That's cool. Own it.
Yeah. 100%.
This
might be a stupid question, but you still wake skate today, right? And do water sports. So if you get cut on any of the burn areas, would it be worse than if it were just to be on normal skin? Like, is that
it takes concern? A lot longer to heal. So I was in Kauai a couple weeks ago.
You got a Band-Aid on right now.
And this little tiny hole here, it's come really far. I'm actually using this experimental product.
I got an extra Band-Aid if you need one.
But this I've got this experimental product that that's supposed to regenerate skin faster. and I'm like one of the first human trials to try it.
No
so
way.
It's kind of cool. Yeah.
That's sick.
I mean, it could like give me cancer one day, so we'll see.
Well,
it could be
will,
sick.
So.
But like, so I went out surfing in Kauai like 3 weeks ago. And even with a rash guard on, just because my rib cage is so sharp here, like within 10 minutes, I'm like, there's all this blood. Oh no. And I'm like, it just ripped a hole. And it takes way longer to heal because your grafted skin will never be as strong. So I do try to be careful. Like even sometimes in my sternum right here, where it's just super raw and thin, like when that opens up, I'm like, oh no. Cause like it could be weeks before it closes. And then you worry about infection and you can almost see the bone right away when it breaks through. So it's like, I do have to be a little more careful, especially if I like try to go skateboard or something where I could get like road rash type falls.
Yeah. Do you still skate to this day?
It's funny, like 2 years ago when Jet Shreds.
Yeah.
When Jet kind of moved down to Claremont and was hanging out with me and Sean Severa a lot. Now they live together, but Jet's a really good skateboarder. And me and Sean used to skateboard in high school and then like kind of got back into it. So I skated a bunch like maybe a year and a half ago. I got into it for like a couple months and it was super fun. And then I just stopped, but I kind of want to start skating again. It's fun. It's just, as you know, as you get older, it's hard on your body. And I kind of just play it safe now. It's like what's that Joe Dirtline where he's like, all I like is snakes and sparklers. Like all I like is manual pads now.
Well, that's like,
and flowing around the park. Like I don't need to get hurt. I don't need to jump downstairs and go street skate and get hurt anymore.
Well, like we were talking about, everything changes as you get older. And as long as you can still find the same fun that you used to or similar fun, then you're killing it. You're doing a great job in life. It's like the manual pad is like the foil of the water sports industry, right? You know,
or even wake surfing.
Or
not to knock wake surfing. But I never actually, fun fact, I never stood on a wake surfer until after my electrocution. You talk about being like a core wake skater. Like I was like, oh, without a doubt, wake surfing's lame. It's not an action sport. I was like preaching, it's not a sport, guys, because you can't get hurt. Like you in my mind, action sports, there has to be that risk factor.
Yeah.
And then I had to eat a lot of humble pie and eat my words because I got out of the hospital and I'm like, I don't know what wake skating looks like. And wake skating, even when I started doing it, was really hard on my body.
Yeah.
To this day, if I go wake skate, by the end of a set, this left hand where my plate is going to be like triple the size. I swell up really bad. The next day, I'm usually like a full recovery day of just like nerve pain firing. Like I love to wake skate to this day, but it's so hard on my body. Whereas wake surfing, when I started doing Operation Wake Surf events with Robbie, well, actually before Operation Wake Surf existed, me and Robbie started doing events before that with servicemen and women, just the two of us. And then it was years later, it turned into, he's like, I want to start Operation Wake Surf, start a nonprofit. But seeing a guy that's maybe 250, 300 pounds with a Purple Heart in one arm, be like, there's no way I'm going to get up behind the boat. I'll come ride in the boat. I'm good ballast and this will be fun. And we're like, no, we're getting you up and working for a whole day and finally getting that guy out of the water and finally getting the guy up and seeing him literally stand up and just ear to ear smile and then instant like usual tears because he just never thought he could get there. I'm like, wake surfing's awesome because it makes it approachable for people who couldn't. And then on the technical side of wake surfing, like I have as much fun wake surfing. I'm going to take heat from this because I know most of the podcast people.
I might give you a little heat. I don't know what you're going to say here.
Are wakeboarders and wake skaters, not wake surfers, probably.
Probably.
Even though wake surfing is probably bigger in our industry now.
Yeah.
But I probably have as much fun wake surfing as I do wake skating now. Because when I first started wake surfing, when I got out of the hospital, it was like, okay, you get board carving in like 10 minutes. But then you start getting into the technical like skim side tricks. Like trying to do like a 540 big spin is as hard as trying like an inside out 3 flip in my mind. Like it gets to this technical level where to this day now I'm always trying to learn new tricks and it kind of it itches that same bug of
has that
like,
progression bug
of like I'm trying to learn new tricks on a wake skate, but I can walk the next day and I'm not hurting too bad. And it is fun. It's fun. It's technical. You're trying to do stuff just like you're trying to learn to flick your kick flips better. Like, you know, I really to hate on wake skating, I cannot stand sometimes what they call landed tricks. Like, I won't mention a name, but like somebody was like, oh, sick, my first 720 big spin. And I was like, oh, that was a super cool 540 or 720 shove. And I was like thinking like, no, that's a really cool 540 shove to skirt around. Like, you basically did a full 180 with your body and then slid around. Like, that doesn't count. And I think about in wake skating, it was so critical. I mean, back in the competition days, if your hand touched, it was like you could try flip a gap and touch your backhand, and it would maybe give you the points of like doing a shove, like a backside shove over that gap.
Yeah.
Like, they would be like, if you touch your hand and you want it to be a trick that's scored, like, do it again.
See, I kind of like that.
And I love that.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that. And I'm still in that mentality.
Yeah.
So we can get into that. I saw some tricks this year in wakeboarding that really ticked me off. Anyways, I don't want to go into that.
Let's go, man. Sorry, I love it.
But anyways,
It's scratching that itch for sure.
yeah, it scratches that itch. It's super technical. But I look at some of these wake surf tricks. So they keep calling these things lip tricks. There's a lip trick movement in wake surfing where they do like a 3 shove on to the top of the lip and then like shove out.
Yeah.
And I'm like, first of all, it's not a lip trick. That's a 3 shove and you landed up high. Like, there's no reason. So I started doing like lip slide, front shove out on my wake surfer, trying to do like 270 shove, front board, shove out. I haven't got that one yet, but I want to, kind of like old school, like wake skate lip tricks.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why don't you guys use the lip? You've got a lip, like, actually, and if you're not legit 90 sliding it, it's not a lip slide. It's not a lip trick.
Yeah.
And you got to pop stuff, guys. like if you do a 3 shove on the surface, it doesn't count. Like, it's not cool.
I totally agree. Yeah.
That's why I love watching Sean Silvera ride. I think, and Jet's getting up there. Jet's amazing. John Anchorman, tons of power. He's a powerhouse. Just everything's big. Like, you watch a guy like that, like when you go watch Sean ride his wake surfer, he's doing a 360 2 feet above the lip and then spinning full 360. And then you watch other guys do like a 180 and land. And I don't know what they call the tricks. That's another problem I have with them.
I'm kind of
like,
lost.
I did
on
a
those
black
ones.
rose, or I did that. And I'm like, what the crap? You can't just come in and do whatever you want. Like,
No.
if it's been done in skateboarding, that's what we had to do in wake skating. Like, we weren't like, oh, cool, I did the first 3 flip, I'm going to call it a Ronald McDonald. We'd be like, no, it's a 360 flip. Like, so I coach a lot of wake surfing now, and I'm always like, hey, let's work on your backside body varial. Let's work on this. And sometimes they're like, no, that's called like a flow to this. I'm like, no, it's not. So I just call it what the trick is, and then you guys could use your made up terms.
Yeah, back it on up. This thing's been done many times. So
yeah, I like wake surfing now in a roundabout way, and I'll take some heat for that. But hey, I'm electrocuted, so
you've taken a lot of heat.
yeah, I take a lot of heat, and my body hurts, so deal with it. That's what's fun for me now.
And he's still getting out there on the wake skate. So
And I even foil because I'm old.
well, that's what I was trying to tell you earlier is your foil age now. So like
Yeah.
your foil age.
Foiling, when foiling becomes cool? When you get like second or third wave back for the first time. Because when you pump out and you get far enough away from the boat, you lose the boat noise almost. And just being somebody that's really geeks out over water and water stuff, like in wake skating, I'm always tethered to the boat, tethered to the cable, tethered to the jet ski. In foiling, to disconnect and then disconnect even more than like wake surf, disconnect to the point where it's almost like this transient moment of you're just like, you just hear the water, you hear your wing. There's no electric motor propelling you, not talking e-foils. You're just using the energy of the water to move, or your own body pumping energy. The fact that you can generate power in flat water to move, I think that's super cool. And it's just kind of this flowy, like I would say I foil at least 4 days a week.
Oh, you're a big foil guy now.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know it was that much.
And not like super into I've been getting into trying some flips and stuff. Like, it'd be cool to learn that, but what I get excited about foiling is just pumping back a few waves and just kind of linking waves together, seeing other boats go by, go steal their wave, or like.
See, I think that is pretty sick, and I feel like it's kind of hard to deny that that's pretty cool. Like,
It's just like fun, and I'm not trying to say it's this like super aggressive sport, but it's a really fun, relaxing thing. It's like going out in the ocean and riding a longboard on some rollers. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, and I think that's when wake foiling to me, it kind of opened my eyes of if you're playing around on all these waves and you're going here and you're coming back here and then you're coming back over here, and it's like that's just cool. You're moving all around the water using all these different waves. And yeah, it's not super gnarly, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. There's a podcast on foiling out of Jacksonville called the Progression Podcast, I think. And I listened to the Noah Flegel episode. It was Austin Tovey. I think his last name.
Yeah, this is a guy that Gunther shouted out on his podcast. I'll put him in.
Yeah, Austin Tovey and Noah Flegel. And they were having a conversation, and I love something one of them said. I don't remember which one of them said it, but they're like, they love the idea, like as a waterman kind of, as having a board in their quiver for the conditions. And that really like resonated with me because growing up as a wake skater, you're like, it's either calm or it's blowing. And if it's blowing, you're either trying to hug a shoreline or you don't ride.
Trying to force it.
And I love the idea of being like, dude, if it's glass out, I want to go wake skate. If it's like decent, I'm going to go surf or foil. If it's blowing 15, 16 miles per hour, now I'm starting to, I haven't gotten into it yet, but now I'm like, I want to get into wing foiling. Because if it's blowing, I love the idea of being able to grab something and do it. If the waves are big, let's go to Coco and surf. Like the idea of just saying, I've got something I can do in every weather condition to get on the water on a board, because that's what it's about for me, is awesome. And the old me was super core, like wake skate or die, like skateboarder. And now I'm like, no, dude, wakeboarding's awesome. Wake skating's awesome. Foiling's awesome. Surfing's awesome.
I agree. And I feel like I kind of compare that to, because I totally agree with that, but I compare that to like in snowboarding or whatever, you have all this sorts of different terrain. Like you got a park, you got groomers, you got backcountry, you got all this stuff. But in water sports, the water's flat, right? So you're not going to have a big water ramp or like all this stuff. Like you got rails, sure, but like it's not quite such a dynamic, different, terrain features you have. But once you start bringing in wind and you start bringing in foil on top of wakeboarding or wake skating, then it's like, okay, now I got options. Like it doesn't have to be perfect just for this one thing. Like I can just kind of shift over to this other thing, still have just as much fun. So totally agree with kind of everything you said there. I got kind of run through some rapid fire questions before we hit some Patreon questions, which will come out after this episode comes out as a separate video. So what is your favorite wake skate trip you've ever taken?
Favorite wake skate trip? Oh my gosh, that's so hard. That might be the hardest question I've ever got.
There you go.
Because there's been a lot of fun wake skate trips, and they're fun for different reasons.
You top three if you got.
Yeah, because so some of the Nike trips are super fun. Like going to the Philippines to film for Aquafrolics was definitely up there. Just to get to session for weeks in the Philippines and have fun, and that was awesome. But then we also did like some road trips for Aquafrolics, like maybe the Texas road trip was more fun than that because we did just jumped in a van, winched through Texas and Louisiana and everywhere we could, and I love that. But then there's super fun trips like Reed and I went to Australia together, and if you didn't already know, action sports isn't always the most organized. So Reed calls me and he's like, hey dude, you want to go to Australia? I'm like, yeah, when? And he's like, gives me the date. And I'm like, yeah, sick. And then I get an email with a flight ticket. So I'm like, oh, Reed's setting up this trip. We're going. So then we're like pretty young and we fly all the way to Australia together, and we've never been there. And we go up to get a coffee, and it's like super cute girls working. She's like, oh, you want it flat white? And we're like, what the heck's a flat white? Yeah, we'll take that. Like, we don't know anything. And we're like, this is so sick. We're in Australia, bro. And we walk out to the curb in the airport, get our board bags. And he looks at me and goes, who's picking us up? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, you set this whole trip up. He's like, what are you talking about? This guy, either MySpace or Facebook messaged me like 2 months ago and was like, do you and Matt want to go to Australia? And I was like, yeah. And he sent me the flights. So I thought you'd been talking to him. I was like, I don't even know who he is. So we're just like standing on the curb. We don't have like travel plans on our phone. Just like, who's picking us up? What are we doing here? and then a guy pulled up in like a little Honda. It's like, American wakeboarders? And we're like, yeah. He's like, jump in. We're like, okay.
Worked out.
And we went to the Blah Blah Cable Park. They had a winter wake skate contest, and it was super fun. Went to the Steve Irwin Zoo and had a blast. So winched on the beach a little bit. So that, like trips like that are just really fun because you're just traveling with your friends.
Yeah.
But then some of the film trips are really cool because you're trying to get down tricks.
You're getting stuff done, yeah.
Yeah, it's super fun.
So, have you ever gotten knocked out jumping down a bridge at Blanchard Park?
Yes, first drop I've ever tried in my
Really?
whole life. Yeah, it's like before I was even sponsored. Like we went there, it's like Kyle Walton and his crew, and it's like you're trying to be like, hey, I'm a wake skater too. This is fun. We can do this together. And I've never hit a witch drop in my life, and it's a pretty tall drop. It's like overhead when the water's low, and I ollied the drop and just face hit my knee, and I feel like I remember floating. Like I don't know that I was totally out, but I must have been kind of out.
I did recently watch the video because that's where I found this on Vimeo, and dude, you look out.
I'm out.
You
okay.
look out.
Well, yeah, a runner jumps off the bridge and starts swimming me in.
That was just a random runner?
That was a random dude. Never got to thank him. He like swam me in and then left. But yeah, and my tooth, one of these teeth right here, I don't know which one is a little grayer because the nerve kind of died because it got really loose. And then I just didn't eat anything hard for like a month and it started to harden up.
Yeah, the same thing. It's like darker.
But yeah, I did. I hit my knee in my face the first time I ever tried to jump down a gap.
It was looking good until the landing. Classic knee to the face wake situation. We got some rapid fire ones from Reed Hansen. So I was talking to him a little bit, and he's wondering what's the fastest you've ever gone in a car?
186.
Jeez. What kind of car is that?
I was in a Corvette.
Okay.
I actually went 186 and I wanted to take a picture and I was like, I'm going way too fast to pull up my phone. So I slowed down to like 160 something. And I think I took
a photo. The Speedo?
Yeah. I think I've got it right here.
Oh man.
Somebody asked me for this the other day and I found the picture. Like, do you have a picture of you going like really fast? I was like, yeah, I think so. And then I found it and I added it to my favorites. So yeah, 186.
That's pretty speedy.
I'll find it while you go to your next question.
What is a mud diver?
Oh, the mud diver was awesome. Mud diver was like peak of like being on top of the world. Here's a picture of the mud diver.
You got the mud diver.
I got a picture. So I can text that to you.
Yeah, text it to me. I'll put it in, yeah.
But it used to be Suburban, got cut in half, welded, shorter wheelbase, had 40-inch tires, 454 in it, and the headers were flipped over straight up. You can see there. So when it ran, the whole time it was running, it blew a flame like 5 feet out of the top. And I remember Reed and I were like, we should take this to Toe Jam. We'll be so cool. And then we're like, it probably won't make it to Toe Jam from Groveland. So we trailered it to Bithlow and then pulled it off the trailer like at Toe Jam and went, whoa, and it's so loud, like ripped into Toe Jam on the mud diver. We were so dumb. But the mud diver was awesome.
He's wondering, do you have any idiosyncrasies? Be completely honest, I'm not entirely sure what that means.
So I'm so glad you said that.
I'll pull up the definition real quick here.
So, well, the reason I'm glad is because there's a story behind that. We were on a hunting trip with this guy. We call him the Doc. I don't even know how old the Doc is. He's got to be like in his 90s now. But the Doc was this, he was an eye doctor, really successful, bought a couple thousand acres out in New Mexico, and we would go out there. They were building a cabin and wood elk hunt there. And so we went out to go to New Mexico, and I'm like super intimidated. Like the Doc is like, it's like talking to like the Godfather. It's the first time I've met him. I've known the rest of his family for a good while at this point. But I've never actually like hung out, me and the Doc. And we sit down at lunch at like Taco Bell on the road trip. And he looks at me and he's just super old and he speaks slow. And he's like, Matt, do you have any idiosyncrasies? And I'm like, what the crap does that mean? And it's like things that are like unique to you. Like, do you always itch your nose or itch whatever? Like, what do you do that's like kind of different? Here's that Corvette picture. So I slowed down to take that picture.
Oh, yep. That's up there. Oh, yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know. I definitely have some idiosyncrasies. Like I'm pretty OCD in a sense. And I think that comes through in my riding a little bit. Like I'll do a trick 20 times until I get the way I like. Like when I did my Lions cover, I backlipped that thing forever and I didn't like my back arm. I was like, in a
it
lot
gets
of the
down
first
to the
shots,
nitty-gritty.
my arm was up like this. I'm like, no, I want my arm down like this. Like, so Garrett kept shooting, but like I wanted to get a specific, like if the board's not fully 90, it's like grab matters. Like you're going to grab Tindy and Tailfish. Like, dude, we're going to crucify you.
Get out of here.
Like, what are you doing with your life? Or when these cable kids hit kickers and they're like, see my 10? And I'm like, you did a 3 on the kicker. It's a really cool 7.
You're not going to hear any argument from this guy.
So yeah, I'd say I have some ideas.
You got a few? Okay.
Sure.
That's fair. I say before we dive into the future here and kind of what you're up to, got another Patreon question from Garrett Cortez. And you were mentioning that you do some public speaking. So he's curious, what are some differences and also some similarities that come from competing, so the nerves you get competing in a big contest, and then now speaking to huge audiences?
Oh, that's a really good question, because I hate public speaking. That's something most people don't know. Like, I'm so scared of public speaking, and I still am. Like, I always have been.
So it hasn't gone away.
I was more scared if I got an award at Wake Awards to like, I'd be more nervous going up to say thank you than like competing in a contest, like right before my run. Like my heart's pounding. I'm like, so what I used to do, competing, and now I do public speaking. I wonder if I've told them this. I wonder if that's where the question came from. But same way I'd like trick my mind into, hey, these are common tricks I do every day, when in reality it was a trick I never landed and expect to land it. I would tell myself when I competed, like, hey, let me go. I'm just out here. My dad pulling me or Reed pulling me, and I'm just going to go have fun. And it's almost like in that Art of War book, like practice how you fight. I don't like most people's approach to coaching, because they're like, come on, kid, get your head in the game. I'm like, no, kid, get your head out of the game. Because when you ride your best, you're probably just out riding with your friends. And now you get in a contest and you're suddenly putting all this pressure on yourself that you've never put on when you do. And the only other competitor I've met like this is Sean Severa. And he's the 4-time world champ, so I think he's pretty good. But like, and not to knock other people, but most people have a preset contest run. Like even Reed, and Reed has a different approach, and he's done really, really good. So there's an argument for the other side. But like when Reed's doing his contest run, you can call the trick before I can call it, because I know, because I'll ride with him. Like, oh, he's gonna do front 3, back 3, switch 3. That like I'll know his run. Whereas Sean, you're like, what are you gonna do? And he's like, I don't know. And you're like, you're riding in 2 seconds. He's like, I don't know. He's like, I'm gonna do a trick, and then I'm gonna do another trick. And he just flows and gets in the zone. But he just goes and has fun. And he knows, like, hey, I want to have this. I want to do these tricks during the run. I know I want to have this bigger bag of tricks. But he really is in the mindset of riding every day. And then I do that when I speak, because I get really nervous if I'm walking out. Like some of the bigger audiences, like I spoke for this like leadership event. The first time I spoke in front of like over 1,000 people, it was this John Maxwell event at 3,000 people. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I looked from backstage and it was huge. And I would literally like be in the mindset of like, all right, I got this big event tomorrow. I got to go share this message with my friends before the big event tomorrow and see if they like it. And I'd pretend I was talking to my friends at the actual event. Because if I'm like, it's game on, get your head in the game, it's go time, I'd be like, I couldn't slow my heart rate down. I couldn't get my nerves under control. So it's really just be in the mindset of when you're having fun, when you're out there and the pressure's on, take the pressure off.
Would you say that, so you've spoken in front of probably many groups of people ranging from, thousands to hundreds or maybe even less. Would you say there's a difference between like 1,000 people versus like 50 or 100 people?
Yes and no. It's really like below 50 up to thousands is the same in my mind. Because if you're speaking to like 10 to 20 people, like if you're doing like a little thing for like, you go into like a rehab center and there's like 15 people in there, you're getting individual eye contact from like this person, and you almost like have to look at everybody and make sure but when you're speaking to like, whether you're speaking to 4,000 people or 300 people, it's kind of just an audience.
Yeah.
And it really, I don't think it feels much different. You just try to be aware of like, connect with the left side of the room, the right side of the room, and the center of the room.
That makes sense. Because I was curious. I think I Googled it a while ago of like, and there was some article where it's like a threshold of those individual eyeballs. I don't know what it was at, 50 or 40 or 30 or something like that. And they're like, but once you get past that point, there's too many people to look at.
There's too many people to look at,
so
for sure.
You're not even going to see them as individuals. It's like a massive group, like you were saying. So
yeah, and like to me, the mindset thing in those events matters a lot because just like in action sports, I think like it's all mental. It's mental and speaking too. Because most people, according to a Barna research study, which is pretty legit, most people are more scared to speak publicly than they are of death, which is kind of crazy. Like they put that as a top fear over dying.
Really?
And I'm like, oh, wow, people would rather die than speak in public. And I was at an event where this lady had heard me speak before and she came up to me beforehand. It was like, hey, I like your stuff. Cause I'd spoke at this leadership event. And then one of the people from her company invited me to just speak to their team or something. I don't remember what the situation was, but she was like, I don't know if I buy into like our mental mindset has an effect on our physical body. And I was like, okay. I was like, hey, there's a couple thousand people here. I'm pretty transparent. I'm like, I'm not afraid of like debate. You can say I'm wrong and I'll admit I'm wrong. I'm like, I was like, where are you sitting? I'm going to bring you up and we're going to talk about it. She goes, oh, no. I can't. I don't do public speaking. I'm not going to do that. And I was like, hey, well, I wasn't going to do that either. Like, I just planted an idea in your head of bringing you on stage off the fact that I know people's number one fear is usually public speaking. Yeah. And judging by your body right now, your heart's pounding out of your chest, just thinking about it. Maybe your palms are sweating. You're having a physical response off of a thought I planted in your head. Like how much more when you sit in a hospital bed and say, I'm dying. I'm never getting out of here. My life is over. And she's like, huh.
You got me. You did mention you do quite a bit of, maybe, I don't know how much, but you've done quite a bit of public speaking. So kind of lean into like, what do you currently do now? Like, what are you up to these days?
That's a great question. I tell my story to help other people discover their story. And I do it on the boat. I do it like people always ask me what I do. And I'm like, I share my story. And they're like, what do you do?
Yeah, but like what?
Sean Murray said his wife, this is like 6 years ago. She's like, what does Matt Manzari do? Because I don't really know. Because I don't know, like, am I a wake skater? Am I a foiler? Am I a surfer now? Like, I think about being on Centurion as a team member. Like, I'm technically their quote unquote wake skater. But we go out, like Rob Snow, he's a photographer. He'll usually like be like, let's get a poke. And we get a poke. And the rest of the photo shoot, I'm like foiling behind a surfer, or even surfing myself. And I'm like, I'm just like a water person.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I guess I wake skate and wake surf and foil. I'd say I'm retired competitively. Like I won't compete again, but I still have sponsors and ride. I do a lot of surf coaching. So that's a lot of my time since 2020. Up until 2020, it was pretty much all speaking. So out of the hospital, my documentary came out and we started doing showings. And I went from like 3 speaking events, just asked to do like, hey, come interview at this church or speak at this school. And I was like, I don't really want to do this because I don't like public speaking. Before I knew it, I ended up on a road trip with Kevin Durham, and we did 28 summer camps in 40 days, which was insane. We drove his whole family and my whole family in one RV, which is nuts, around the country, and just spoke at all these camps and just poured into these kids. And then that led to so much, like, you speak at a camp and then the kids go home and tell their dad, and their dad might be at a company. It's like, oh, we need a speaker for a corporate retreat and this. And before I knew it, by the end of that year, I had 50 events booked for the next year. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's like every week.
That's every week.
And
yeah.
So it really, like, off of my accident, which happened in 2014, probably from 2016 to 2020, I spoke like 50 to 70 times a year, every year. And it was pretty out of control because I consider myself a pretty involved, like, dad and husband. And because it's like I would justify it in like, hey, most dads are home every night at 5, but they're gone all day. And they get home and it's like they get home from work and they're beat. Whatever. They're beat and dinner and maybe turn the TV on, where I might be gone for a week speaking, and then I try to do events back to back and then like leave a week gap if I could, or a week and a half. And I get home and like, hey, daddy's home. You want to go tent camp? You want to go, jet ski? What do you want to do? Let's just go have fun. So it was like when I was home, I was home. But when COVID hit, my wife did the math and she's like, hey, you were gone collectively 8 months last year. I was like, oh, wow. So COVID, like, not to be insensitive, because COVID brought a bunch of tragedy. I know, like, people lost people, but in my life personally, COVID was like a huge gift because the world shut down. And the first thing that went out the window was public speaking events. And I basically sat at home and was like, man, I went from thinking I was a pretty involved husband and dad to being like, this is what I'm missing. And Centurion did that video called, if you Google Matt Manzari second time around, it comes up.
Yep.
And that video was based on, they said, hey, we're doing some different marketing videos this year. What's important to you? And I'm like, time. Time is important. I want to tell the story of my life, because I wanted to tell my accident story of my life, but in the framework of what are we doing with the time we have? Because COVID gave me this time at home, and I was like, whatever the world looks like after this, it's not going to be like it was before for me. So we started getting creative on like, what events could I do that I could drive to and bring the family? Because, you know, a typical speaking event, they reimburse your flight, coach ticket, one night in a hotel, whatever, but it wouldn't be affordable to take all the money from speaking and fly my whole family on every trip. So we started thinking differently, taking fewer events as it came back. So now I'm probably on track to do like 15 or 20 this year. I try to speak like once, maybe twice in a month. I have 3 coming up in April. So that's a heavier month, but then nothing in June. So I've got like, it'll probably balance out 15, 20 events. And then during COVID is when Sean was going from Supra, I want to get on Centurion, got on Centurion with me, and we started coaching because there was this guy Tarzan. I don't know if you know him, but he had Wake Surf Orlando. So Tarzan had like a pretty big like clientele. Sean was kind of the 3-time world champ at that time, or 2-time. I don't know what he was, but Sean was the guy in wake surfing. And then I have all this like previous, like know all the industry people from back in the day, and kind of like years of coaching. Cause we've been coaching. We used to coach at Reed's parents' camp when they didn't have staff guys. So I've been coaching my whole life, here and there. So we were like, between the 3 of us, we probably have the most coaching experience. So we started doing that during COVID because we couldn't travel and couldn't. So we had lots and lots of lessons during COVID, and then that kind of faded away. And then me and Sean now still coach, but kind of separately, but we share students. Like if I'm out of town, I get somebody, I'll point it his way and vice versa. So when you ask what I do, I kind of am a wake surf coach, kind of am a wake skater, kind of am a public speaker. I started a boat dealership. So I own 7 water sports, the Central Florida Centurion dealer. And again, I never want to start a boat dealership, but, I rode for Centurion through COVID and was like, man, they pay us as athletes and give us boats to promote a product. But I get all these people that are like, dude, I love this wake over my Malibu or my Nautique, because that's kind of the big ones in Florida, Nautiques of Orlando and Tommy's. Where can I get a Centurion? And I'm like, sick, glad you love it. I don't know. Like there's Nautique, Miami became Nautique Centurion in Miami. You can go down 4 hours south or north of Atlanta, like pick your poison, 4 hours south or 6 hours north. So I called Centurion. I'm like, have you ever had an athlete become a dealer? Because there's a huge hole. And they're like, oh, we know there's a hole, but all our dealer apps in Orlando have been either just investors that just have the money to do it, but they don't know the industry, so we're not going to give it to them, or have been like an industry person that can't get the backing. And I'm like, well, I've got friends in Utah that would love to invest in this and be kind of the financial backing. And then I know the industry and would love to help promote it. So we started 7 Water Sports, and my initial dream was to be like Tesla. Like I wanted to eliminate the dealership. Like a customer should never have to go into the dealership, because you think about some guy that has the money to get one of these boats, probably works a lot, and now he's like has his Saturday off and he's got to go pull his boat out of the water, maybe have someone drive it around to the public ramp. He pulls it out, tow it an hour to a dealer, to then leave it for maybe weeks to get worked on, and then and it's just like, it's a nightmare. So initially I'm like, I want to do no brick and mortar. And Centurion's like, we've never had that. I don't think that's going to work. I'm like, it's going to work for sure. And they're like, no, it's not. I'm like, let me try it. And then we had 13 boats in my driveway, and my wife's like, I want my house back, because literally every inch of our front yard was boats. I'm like, okay, you're right. We need to get some kind of location, but I still don't want to do like a big fancy dealership. Because my goal to this day is for a customer to never go into my dealership. Like I want it to be a white glove experience. Like when you come, cool. You want to demo our boat and I'd love to show you. I can tell you a bunch of reasons why I think our wave is the best wave for surfing. But I also joke at boat show that I'm probably the worst boat salesman in the world because I'm so big on story. I'll have customers come in and I'm like, no pressure. I'm like, dude, maybe you're not into this. Don't buy a boat. I'm like, maybe you're into pontooning. Get that thing. Maybe you're into RVing. Go get an RV. I'm like, whatever you're into, I don't care. Like, whatever you're into, I don't want you to get later in life and realize you missed your kid's childhood because you worked it off or because you just were working or busy the whole time. Like, go build memories with your kids or your friends or your family, whatever your community is, and live life every day because I know how quick life can change and you could realize it could be gone. So I'm always like, dude, if you want to buy a boat, like I can give you a bunch of reasons why I think we're going to give you the best dealer experience. I'll go that extra mile. We've got, we'll do a dockside 2 hours away. Like I'll send my tech 2 hours to change your oil so you don't have to tow your boat in ever. When you get your delivery, one thing that drives me crazy is I get messages on Instagram, and not just with Centurion, from tons of brands. I'll get some guy that's like, hey, I've got this whatever Mastercraft X24. How do I set up the wave? And I'm like, why were you not taught that? Like, and boat driving, like how many times do you get frustrated when the person falls and the guy does a big power turn and sends rollers through the whole lake, not realizing it takes twice the time and fuel and messes up the line or doesn't know how to share a line. And so I'm like, a boat delivery should not be, your boat's here, come take a photo of you and your family, stand in front of it, call us if you have questions. It should be, so when you buy a boat from us, it's like, I'll send me or Sean Severa or, maybe if Whitley Stewart's in town, I want to start using her too eventually. But like, I want to send you a delivery from a pro rider that's going to give you 1 hour driving lesson. Here's quick tips, how to drive, how to set up your wave, how to customize it for your liking. Do you like it steep and short or long and mellow? And then like, let's get your whole family at surfing, do a free lesson too. Cause I think about just being a kid and dude, if I was a kid and my parents got a boat and like Parks Bonifay came to do the delivery, I'd be like, what? So I'm like, I want my customers to have that experience. So yeah, I've got a boat dealership. I never wanted to do that, but I do. I've got speaking, I've got writing, I've got coaching, and then I really like real estate. So we started to dabble in like real estate stuff too. So I don't know.
Do it all.
Yeah. Do lots of things. I always think it's funny when people say, what do you do? We always bring it like fiscally. And I always think to me, that's more of a, like, it's not about how you make your living. You can make your living lots of, like, look at Patrick Whelan. You know him?
Oh yeah.
So Patrick,
Day trader or whatever, right?
Dude, Patrick, that's a cool story. Cause he started at the bottom. Now he's here. Patrick used to work for Alliance making videos, and funny story, Reed and I feel so bad. Sorry, Patrick. We tried to pay Patrick $20 to go home one time. Like, like Patrick would make like $50 a video from Alliance. And he's like, we got to do this video. I want to do this video of you and Reed. And we went out like mudding the night before and got our trucks really stuck. And we're out till like 3 or 4 in the morning. And then we're like, crap, Patrick's coming at like sunrise. And he pulls in the driveway and he starts blowing our phones up. He's like, I'm here. And Reed wakes up. He's like, Matt, get up. I'm like, what? He's like, Patrick's here. I'm like, oh my gosh. He's like, you want to chip in? Like, we'll give him like 10 or $20 each and just ask him if he'll just go home.
That's brutal.
And Patrick's like, we text him. We're like, you want to just reschedule and we'll pay for your gas? And he's like, no, get out here. And then we filmed a cool video. It was awesome. But like Patrick, dude, I think of who he is, and he's like a fisherman, day trader. He's just like an adventurer. He loves the foil. He loves the water sports industry. He loves drones and cameras. And it's like what he does for a living is a bunch of different stuff. He shoots all the stuff for Slingshot. I don't know if he still does, but he used to. He runs, most people don't know, he is Drone Nerds. That's like the biggest.
I did hear that.
Biggest drone Instagram. He got that job when they had like no followers. And he's like, I'll build this thing to huge. And they're like, you got to be in the office 40 hours a week. And he's like, I'll never be that, but I promise you I'll build it. And then he did. And he day trades. And it's like what he does for money has almost nothing to do with who he is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of people when they ask that, I'm not saying that I expect this answer, but they're like, well, I'm in marketing, or I'm an accountant, or like I do this one thing at this one place, like this amount of time per week, per year.
Yeah.
But like a lot of times, especially people that are, self-employed to a certain extent are like, well, I do this, and then I also do this over here. And then when I have some more free time, I go and do this too. And it's like, well, yeah, it's more than who you are. Like, not one thing defines who they are and what they do. It's just a combination of a bunch of things, which I think is really cool to hear about.
In that second time around video that Centurion did, it ends with me reading a comic to my kids, and it's a Calvin Hobbes comic. And he's like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm digging a hole. It's like, what are you looking for? He's like, buried treasure. Well, what have you found? And he goes, some dirty rocks, disgusting grubs, and weird rock or weird roots. He goes, on your first try, he goes, yeah, there's treasure everywhere. And I love that. The reason we put that in, it's like, it's so simple, but there's so much depth to that story. Because I'm like, when I ask what your story is and who are you, like, it's not about what you're doing. Like, if my story was Matt as a wake skater, well, at one point in my story, that's a cool story. I'm a young kid, all my dreams come true. At another point, I might never do it again if my identity's in that. Well, who am I now? That's why athletes lose their NFL career and commit suicide or something, because they struggle with depression, because their identity is wrapped up in what they do. And that can happen in any trade. I'm a investor, I'm a whatever, like you just said. I'm in marketing. But I'm like, for most of us, like if you called me and said, Matt, what are you up to? And I'm digging a hole in my backyard and finding dirt and rocks and grub. If you're like, what are you up to? I'm like, nothing. What are you up to? It wouldn't be worth talking about. I'm digging a hole in my backyard, let alone writing a comic about it. But who Calvin and Hobbes are and who they're created to be are these like adventurous comic characters that find adventure and purpose and meaning in ordinary things. So who they are becomes the story, not what they're doing. The story could be digging a hole, walking down a sidewalk. Doesn't matter what they do. The story is who they are. And I believe that's all of our stories.
Yeah.
That the story is who we are, not what we do.
Definitely.
I'm a wake skater, a father, a husband, investor, a boat dealer. I'm all sorts of things. And my identity's in none of them. If I stopped doing all those tomorrow, I'd still be me. And then who I am, I bring into those things.
Yeah. That's a good way to kind of almost flip it around. One last question before we do some thank yous and then hit the Patreon questions, which I think I mentioned it, but the Patreon questions will come out on Patreon tomorrow, and then they'll come out on Sunday on the YouTube channel. So if you want to check those out, either subscribe to the Patreon or check it out on YouTube. So last question. Will you ever stop wake skating?
No. Never.
Kind of answered it, but yeah.
Yeah. Never. And even if I get to where I'm old man foiling a lot more and surfing a lot more, like I'll still wake skate. I mean, I don't wake skate very much now just because it's hard on my body. But when I do, I love it. And I'm at a point in my life where I don't really ride wake to wake anymore. So even when I'm riding the boat, I'd rather like the last Centurion shoot we did, I was like, hey, let's set up a canoe over land and I'll like slide the canoe and Jet was there before he's on Mastercraft and like had him act like he's paddling and do like a backside 180 or try to kickflip the canoe and like stuff like that, lip tricks. I love riding behind the Sea-Doo still. I really like cable because it's a little easier on my body. The upward pull takes a lot of tension off. Cable's cool. We don't have a lot of great cable parks in Florida.
For wake skating?
For wake skating. So
what would make a great cable park for a wake skater? Full size.
Full size cable for a wake skater. To me, we just overbuild stuff. Too many kinks and it's like we try too hard.
See, as
like,
a wakeboarder, I'm like, there's not enough.
These rails like up,
the
down,
kinks
up,
aren't
down,
aggressive
up, down.
enough.
Yeah, to me, I'm like, we need flat bars, boxes, mellow inclines. Because to me, the technical side of wake skating isn't see if you can board slide this like crazy up and down feature. Like I'd rather see, somebody 270 shove front board, big spin out on a flat bar. That's way cooler than like technically survive riding over some huge, atrocious obstacle.
Atrocious.
But I like West Rock, and West Rock has a lot of like kinks and stuff, but they also do a lot of simple stuff. Like they just get creative and they change it up a lot. Like shout out, I think West Rock's the best cable in the US.
Hot take, but for wake skating, it definitely could be. I don't know. I'm not a huge wake skater. I think maybe, what do you think? Maybe a little bit more metal. Would that help as a wake skater? You like hit some metal?
Well, no, I mean,
you don't like metal?
I'm saying no, don't get me wrong. Like all the parks could use more metal.
Yeah.
But I think as a business owner myself, I know there's liability issues and stuff. So obviously all of us that like want to
the
ride,
quarters on hard, yeah.
we don't want anything ride on. We don't want anything 3 foot wide. I want like round pipes and flat bars and like super legit stuff, but that's not going to happen just because they'll get sued and whatever. So, yeah, more metal is cool. Skinnier rails are cool. But just to have fun and go do laps on the cable. Again, I'm old now. I'm trying to get out of being so core. Like if I can go ride on the slip and slides and, you know, I called Dylan Miller a couple of years ago. I was going to West Rock. I was like, dude, can I have a wheelie board? And he's like, what? I was like, you know, the wheelie boards. You guys go around cables and do wheelies on them. And I'm like, it's not a manual because there's no trucks. There's no balance point as far as like, you can hit the tail. There is a balance point.
No. I'm not disagreeing.
But I just like, I joke. I call like flexi wakeboards wheelie boards. But I'm like, dude, I want to do wheelies.
Can you blunt slide on a wakeboard?
I've never tried.
I'm saying not you. Can you?
Oh,
can
a
anyone?
person? No, because you can't lock in. That's not a blunt. It's like a off kilter tail press or back lip. I don't know what you want to call it. It's cool. It's like a steezy lip slide. But come on, guys.
I just wanted to hear it. I knew it was in there. I just wanted to hear it.
I'll say it if nobody else will.
I love it. Yeah, before we jump into these Patreon questions, you got anybody you want to thank or anything else you want to touch on here?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to thank, we've already touched on Bobby Jean. I'd love to thank my family. I got 3 boys that are super fun. They keep my life super interesting. Centurion Boats, for sure. They've supported me since day one out of my accident. I was like not even back on the water really that heavily yet. And I spoke at the WSIA Leadership Summit that you were talking about earlier that you spoke at. And Amy Mossy and Paul Singer, he was at the time president of Centurion, and they were back on Malibu back in the day, like when I was involved with Malibu, and they were like, Matt, we miss you when you come back to the wake industry. Because that event was exciting. It was like my old life, my new life kind of met. I was like speaking and people knew I was doing this thing, but I hadn't got to like do it for any of my friends yet. And I did that event. I was like, no, like I'm still going to wake skate forever, but I'll probably never compete again or be like a pro again. So, those days are probably over. And Paul was like, well, dude, how can we support you? And I'm like, well, I'd love to. I did some, Wounded Warrior event type events, and I want to get people on the water. I was like, I would love to do a cancer survivor event, burn survivor. Like, if you could lend me a boat for a couple days a year to just take people out and share the love of water sports, like that'd be awesome. And Paul was like, dude, let's put you on the team. Do it like the old days. Go put your colors in. We'll give you a boat, and you just worry about sharing the love of water sports and making that your thing. So they've been super supportive. So I love Centurion. Fatatesi Wake Skates just got a board, a limited board come out. They contacted me and were like, hey, we're doing these like guest boards and we'd love to do one. And it's been a lot of years since I got to design a board. I've always wanted to incorporate my Wolf logo.
Yeah, pull that out. Because I don't think you'll be able to see it behind the table there.
So I've never had a board with my Wolf logo.
There you go.
My last design board was with Connolly. And I basically, when they stopped kind of making my board, they sent me like 20. So I had like a bunch of boards left. And then I started blowing through them and I got down to like 2. And I was like, I can't ride this at the cable or I can't scratch it up because the graphic will be gone. So I've been riding that remote at cables and then my old pro model. So it was really cool to do board with them this year.
Yeah, that's sick.
Performance ski and surf. Bill's always supported me. So he's always been super awesome. And the Fuel Mule, I just actually started riding for them yesterday. If you've seen
breaking news.
If you've seen a fuel mule,
I have no idea what this is.
It is a 50-gallon gas tank on wheels. And
maybe I have seen
it has
this.
an electric motor. So instead of having to take like a bunch of cans to the station, you can wheel it right up.
Electric motor, you mean the wheels are
it's
powered.
electric because it would be too heavy to wheel up and down into your truck.
Yeah.
So you can literally just like hold a button and walk alongside with it. It's effortless. My 5-year-old could put it in the back of the truck. And you walk it up, drive to the gas station, fill up in one shot, walk it to the end of your dock, and pumps it straight into the boat. So they're pretty cool. I'm going to have a hashtag coming up or not some kind of like a discount code. It'll probably be like Matt's Fuel or something. You can save $100 if you buy one. But they're pretty cool. So just got backed by those guys. And lastly, X Insurance. You know, you kind of see X's all over. I always have X jackets on and X hats and X. They're awesome. You know, they're a privately owned insurance company. They do specialty insurance. So it's the stuff like you can call for home insurance. Reed used those guys for a little while with his dock building company. Like it's more like you can do home insurance, auto, but it's what can you not get insured? Like if you got a Pro Tour stop and you're like, how do I get insurance for this weekend? Or how do I get insurance for this? You know, they used to do like professional bull rider tour or like a cigarette boat race for the weekend or a skydiving company. Like what's really hard to insure, they'll insure anything. So hard to insure stuff.
Do they insure wake parks? Have they thought about that?
They insure wake parks.
They do?
They do.
Oh, there you go.
So if you're going to do a wake park, if you have a wake park and you need insurance, call X Insurance.
Because I know insurance is tough in that market especially. So
tell them Matt Manzari sent you because you will save money. It's not just to plug, oh, cool, pat myself in the back. I helped you get, or like it looks good to them. It will help you out. So call X, tell them you heard about it from me, and they will insure whatever you need to insure.
There you go. Love it. Anybody else? Anything else?
I mean, there's a bunch of people I could think. I mean, just
that's a tough road to go down.
That's a tough road to go down. So I don't know if I'm going to do that, but just all the people over the years, you know who you are, who have pulled me, who have been riding partners, who have supported me along this journey, who have donated, whether it's money or time or just to help us get on our feet and now really like living kind of my dream life. And I wouldn't have got here without you guys. So thank you to a lot of people.
Love it. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks for coming on. This has been a great chat. Hope everybody enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. If you're interested in supporting the podcast, make sure to join that Patreon. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, Hunter.